Thank you. Welcome to HART's regular Board of Directors meeting. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much for that. First order of business is our approval of the minutes. I'd entertain a motion for approval of those minutes. I have a first and a second on that. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Same thing with our board workshop minutes of June 9th of this year. I have a motion. A second. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Thank you. Okay, our first order of business today is something that we don't like to see, but we understand why sometimes these things happen. We have Miss Ann Madden has left our board. She's been a board member with us since October 5th of 2011. She was appointed by our Board of County Commissioners. And she has served on several of our committees, including the Major Projects and Legislative Committee, the HART ADA Task Force, and the Ad Hoc Committee on Revision of HART Board Policies, and was our board representative for the Hillsborough Transportation Disadvantage Coordinating Board. It's a sad thing for me to say to you, Ann, that you're going to be leaving. You were a presence here on my right-hand side every meeting. You were a great board member. We're sorry to see you go, but I'm going to present something to you. If you just stand up for a moment. Give out these glass buses to too many people, so.
I have the empty box.
You already have the empty box? She's got the empty box already, so. It's my pleasure to present this to you. This is never an easy board to be on. There are a lot of issues that we always have to deal with, and, you dealt with them in a very consistent way. I can't find anybody else that was more consistent and more involved than you, and I appreciate your time here. I know you're going to be doing some other good things. I wish you luck on your new endeavor and your nonprofit career. So, thanks so much, Ann. Appreciate it very much. Put this over here.
Act like you like me.
Thanks. Okay.
Do you mind if I say just
Absolutely.
something?
Please do. Please do.
I promise I won't take too much time. I want to tell you that I have an educational background in political science at both the bachelor's and master's level. And one thing that I learned is that people can argue for weeks about the intent of the Founding Fathers. But one thing that speaks very clearly to me in all of their writings was the fact that they expected citizens to be involved in their government at every level. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be involved at this level. I wish you luck. I would hope that as you go forward, you would take a couple of things in mind. I think that your professional staff is one of the finest staffs I have seen of all the government agencies I've had the opportunity to work for, from the top to the bottom on the pay scale. Every one of them has answered questions, has been very forthcoming, has done everything they can to educate me on how to be an effective member of the board. So I would ask you to treat them fairly and gently, if you could, because you hold their careers in your hand. The other thing I would tell you is that while some of my friends have speculated that this was the first time I was backing away from a fight, no, it's not. I feel very strongly that I have a call from God on my life, that I am to be serving at a place called Good Samaritan Mission out in Waimama. For those of you who are not familiar with the work that they do in helping people to raise their eyes a little higher so that they can see some of the opportunities they have. I have taken the liberty of leaving some information packets with Lena. If you need me, I live in Ruskin. I work in Waimama. I'm there. If you need some outreach into the community, call me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann. And you don't get away. You don't get away that easily. And Miss Merman wants to say a few words.
And, I mean, we've been friends for a long time. You're an outstanding member of the South Shore. And
Can I quote you on that? Okay.
she really is. She is always at every event. She's always for the helping people. And that's really why, you know, we're here today, and I just admire your move to really go and dig deeper into helping the people at Good Samaritan Mission. I think that's commendable for any citizen to do that.
When God speaks clearly, it's hard to argue.
But good luck to you.
Thank
and
you.
I know we'll see each other soon.
Okay.
And I will say thank you very much for your service. And, you know, staff, the comments you made about staff were wonderful. I'm not sure if that's a result of getting a crystal bus or not.
It is.
But staff, you might remember that if you want to get more kudos. You might want to find more crystal buses out there.
Do you want to borrow mine?
No, that's okay. Ann, thanks again for your service. Good luck at Good Samaritan. I think I'm coming to see you,
You are.
this week,
You
I
are.
believe. So
You get the tour.
I'll get the tour, and I really.
Told you it was my fault.
But we really appreciate it, and good luck in your new endeavor, because it's going to be going from this board to doing God's work, as you said, is just as difficult, and we wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, our next agenda item, I think we just have the FTA Environmental and Sustainability Management System Institute Completion Certificate. Sir?
Good morning. Jeff Stewart, Chief Financial Officer for HART. As you know, HART has been a participant in the FTA's Environmental and Sustainability Management System program for the last year. It's a 2-year program that HART was accepted in a very small membership across the country. Only 26 transit agencies have had the opportunity to partake in this opportunity. HART staff has, the core team has completed the year of training, 4 workshops we concluded in June. With that, the FTA and the Virginia Tech University staff that has provided that training over the last year has made a very big deal about the graduation, and with that, provided HART with a plaque
Oh, wow.
saying that HART has completed the training, and we are embarking on the next year of the program, which is preparing for 4 audits. Now, the last year has been a tremendous amount of work above and beyond what this core team's day job is for HART, which is keeping buses on the road, our facilities safe, and our projects moving forward. I've asked them to be here this morning, and if they could stand and be recognized for the work. These guys are working hard, and it's not done yet. We have our first audit is actually the second public hearing in September. We have an audit in February. Then we will have 2 audits in the summer and fall of 2015 by the ISO certification group. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but this was a good accomplishment, great accomplishment for HART. Again, we're one of very few transit agencies in America that have completed this training. So thank you for letting us do it, and thank you for the staff for getting us there.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. Now, I think this next one is probably for you also, which is is it the Government Financial Officers Association? Is that correct?
It is, but it's HART, yes.
Okay. I know, I understand that. I know, but you are part of the Financial Officers Group, I think, aren't you? So you can accept it on our behalf. So go ahead and tell us about this award.
All right. HART has received the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from the Government Finance Officers Association for October 1st, 2013 for the fiscal year for this year's budget that we're in right now. This award represents a significant achievement to HART. It reflects the commitment of HART and staff to meeting the highest principles of government budgeting. In order to receive the budget award, the entity had to satisfy nationally recognized guidelines for effective budget presentation. These guidelines are designed to assess how well an entity's budget serves as a policy document, a financial plan, an operations guide, a communications device. Budget documents must be rated proficient in all 4 categories and the 14 mandatory criteria within those categories to receive the award. So we are very proud of this award as well. And the budget staff that helped put this together is here, Jeannie, as well. Farther up, Doug, thank you. This team has worked very hard getting last year's budget book presented and ready for GFOA, addressing all the issues that they brought up over the last couple of years, recommendations for improvement. Once the board adopts the budget in September, we will work with this team diligently to craft another HART budget book that hopefully we'll receive another one of these in the coming years. So again, thank you for your support and staff support.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Another great job by your staff, by our staff. We really appreciate all your work on behalf of HART. And I think the last, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Davin.
I would just like to comment, following up on what Ms. Madden had to say. This award would not have been received by this agency 5 years ago. The amount of improvement and efficiency that's been introduced into our budgeting and financial processes is really impressive. And I think we all recognize that it didn't happen by itself. We've had wonderful leadership by Jeff and his team, and we've come a long way. I can remember the first day that I came on this board after having been gone for many years, and the then budget director was trying to explain to me the budget, and I couldn't make sense of it at all. It's just been a tremendous improvement, and I think we should be very proud of what our financial profile is now.
Thank you. Any other comments? We have one more proclamation, and it is honoring the Minority Enterprise Development Week. Mr. Sandusky, you could tell us about that?
Sure. Good morning, Marco Sandusky, Manager of EEO and Compliance Programs. For the last several years, the HART Board has submitted a proclamation honoring Minority Enterprise Development Week. This is an event that HART sponsors. HART has a very active disadvantaged business enterprise program, is very active in the community with outreach to small and minority women-owned businesses. And so I will quickly read this proclamation, which will be included in the MedWeek brochure. Hillsborough Transit Authority proclamation honoring Minority Enterprise Development Week. Whereas since 1983, the U.S. President has proclaimed a National Minority Enterprise Development Week observance to recognize the outstanding achievements of minority business enterprises. This event provides a unique forum to support minority business development and address the major issues affecting the growth of MBEs. And whereas this week's MedWeek conference theme is connecting business with opportunity, and whereas Tampa Bay MedWeek activities will include an MBE CEO panel discussion breakfast, seminars, business matchmaker and expo, awards luncheon, and bus tour to showcase minority businesses, and whereas HART is dedicated to ensuring minority businesses are provided opportunities through its Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, small business initiatives, and active support and engagement with the DBE community. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Directors of the Hillsborough Transit Authority that August 19th through 22nd, 2014 is proclaimed Minority Enterprise Development Week. The HART Board of Directors hereby sponsors the Tampa Bay MedWeek and urges residents to patronize small, minority, and disadvantaged businesses, passed and adopted by the Board of Directors of the Hillsborough Transit Authority on July 21st, 2014.
Thank you, Mr. Sandusky. Any questions of Marco on this? Thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for your support.
All right, the next item on our agenda is public input. As we always do, items that are on the agenda, the members of the public have 3 minutes to speak. The first member of the public that signed up to speak is Ms. Sharon Calvert. If you could come up here, Ms. Calvert.
morning.
Morning.
Regarding the MPO presentation that's being made today, I will be interested in what's actually being presented. As every single map in that proposal shows the system alternatives as rail. And all the rail lines go far beyond the area considered downtown. This is surprising because the post-referendum survey that the MPO did after the referendum had rail down towards the bottom of the priority list. Many of these lines are reflected as CSX lines. And what are all the issues that are associated with acquiring or trying to acquire CSX lines? The MPO stated as its goals and objectives is to find lower cost options. It's uncertain whether the federal government will continue to provide large amounts of grant money for high cost transit systems in the future. So shouldn't the goal be to find cost-effective, efficient, and flexible transportation options? We have dispersed work centers. So if a plan such as this is pursued, what happens to the transportation solutions in the rest of the county? We're expecting 600,000 population growth over the 25 years, but the growth is occurring in the county. And HART does have a vetted and approved TDP that would double the bus service, I understand, over the next decade. But at the end of the day, transportation needs to be about mobility first and foremost. Also, the Transportation Policy Leadership Group's proposal to restructure and repurpose and expand the size of HART or expand its mission was done without getting a legal opinion from the Hillsborough County Attorney's Office. The county attorney only provided legal considerations, but not a legal opinion. I understand the HART attorney has provided a legal opinion, and it confirms what I believed is that it's much more complex to make that change than what the county administrator, Mike Merrill, inferred. HART doesn't do roads, they shouldn't do roads, and the change proposed is of a magnitude requiring much more than a simple reconfiguration. I don't believe the restructure proposal is in the best interest of your customers, the residents, and the taxpayers of Hillsborough County. And I hope and ask that you oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Calvert. Next signed up to speak is Mr. Ken Roberts. Mr. Roberts?
Good morning. Morning, Ken.
Morning. You know, every time I say Mr. Roberts, I can only think of Henry Fonda. But if you know, I'm not saying that you look like Henry Fonda, but that's not a bad thing either, so.
My name is Ken Roberts. I'm with Citizens Organized for Sound Transportation. You know, I just want to pause to echo Ann Madden's comment that government works best where the citizens are engaged. And Ms. Davin's comment and observation that this board's change over the last 5 years has really been night and day. It's really quite remarkable. But another change is being contemplated that concerns us very much, and I want to say a word about that this morning. And I think it's time to call a spade a shovel. Top elected officials in this county are discussing what amounts to a hostile takeover of this board. They want to put themselves in direct control of the funds to which HART enjoys access. The plan is to take your seats, remove you, then broaden the scope of the new super agency so as to supersize the bag of federal money that's the real object of this exercise. This is fundamentally wrong. It tears down the deliberative process that protects us from ill-conceived decisions. It disintegrates the best public agency in the area, and it puts this county on the fast track for reaching into our fellow Americans' pockets all across these United States and just taking their money. To do that here in Hillsborough County to our citizens, we have to have a vote. But to do this to our fellow Americans through Washington, all we need is the permission of an unelected bureaucrat. Do we really want to morph this board from getting the most for our money into just getting the most money? And the rationale is strange to catch up with the idea. The Policy Leadership Group says they need to make HART a super agency so that they can have a good handoff of their ideas. Think about that. When they take these seats in this room, they'll be in a position to hand off to themselves. What a concept. Circumstances have thrust this board into the center of what may be the biggest power struggle in the county's history. I think it's likely to get hot in here. Powerful forces are going to bring pressure to bear. Now, you can do nothing, and this powerful current will sweep you out of office, the office you've discharged so well, and sweep us, all of us, into a future of bad transit management and a change of focus from getting the most out of our money to just getting the most money. On the other hand, you can recognize this for what it is. It's a naked grab for HART's access to funds, and you can continue your excellent public stewardship by fighting this ill-advised takeover. So on behalf of the citizens of this county, I ask you to hold this ground. Resist this takeover. HART's legal counsel has laid out the requirements of the law. Wrap yourselves in that armor and fight to be sure that we get the due process that the law guarantees to the citizens of this county. Please, we don't want to be railroaded. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Our next speaker is Ms. Catherine Malcolm. Ms. Malcolm? Am I pronouncing that right, or? What's that?
She was actually going to yield her time.
Okay.
That's how we actually has to.
Is Ms. Malcolm here, though?
Yes, she's right here.
Okay. Ms. Malcolm, is that correct? You would like to have, I will take the step of allowing him another minute for her speaking. I mean, that's how we do it at council, so I would prefer to keep it, since I don't think we have any rules on hand that deal with that. So if that's all right. Ms. Merman just said the county gives 2, so I don't know. Should we split the difference and give a minute and a half, or I don't have a problem with doing 2. I will ask the board if it's okay. Can we allow a total of 3 minutes for his taking over for Ms. Malcolm?
Well, so we don't use the whole 3 minutes ourselves discussing it.
Yeah.
I would like to ask, how many people want this?
I think we only have Mr. Thurman and then Mr. Compton. So.
Wanted to yield to me as well.
Okay, so
Why don't you just give them the time?
I'll go ahead, if that's all right with the board. I want to make sure it's okay.
I won't take it all.
Okay, Mr. Thurman, thank you so much. I apologize for delaying it, but we need to set the rules a little bit. So
That's fine. That's fine.
Go
you
ahead,
know.
go ahead and give him 9 minutes, please.
Okay. Hello, this is Kevin Thurman. I'm Executive Director of Connect Tampa Bay. I live at 1220 Cumberland Avenue in Tampa, Florida. Now, the reason why I'm coming here to speak to you for about 9 minutes is because I don't want to just stand up here and throw out some fiery language. I actually have a suggestion for this board today, and I want you to seriously consider it. And the first thing is that we have to understand the context of all these discussions. I'm talking mostly about the TED PLG and a lot of the things that we're talking about, legal wrangling and stuff. But I think we first have to start with one simple thing, and understanding the context of where transit, which is what this board is in charge of, fits within our overall transportation scheme right now, today. And what that is less than 12% of the money we spend in this area goes to transit. That's it. If we take an entire half or an entirety of a 1 cent sales tax, you're increasing it to 22 and 31%. So when we're talking about this, we're never talking about some massive, huge change in the way we do things, aside from doubling, triple. So let's look at other people. Right now, over the next 5 years and for the previous 10, we average around 10% of our funding from FDOT going to transit. Orange County is 37%. Miami is 36%. Are we not a major metropolitan region in this state? Should we not be striving to compete with the other major metropolitan regions in this state? Forget the Charlottes, forget the Austins, forget the Portlands, forget anybody. Can we compete with the Orlandos and the Miamis? Is the question we have to face. Now, we've been on the road of determining where we could spend more money and where we need to spend existing money that we have in transportation before. In 2007 to 2009, the Transportation Task Force in Hillsborough County, which I know many of you remember, met for a long period of time. And they discussed where we need to look at transportation. And they looked at what to spend the CIT money on. And where we ended up with CIT was over $570 million spent on road widenings, and $31 million spent on transit. So when we come up here and talk about 20-to-1 numbers on roads versus transit, this isn't some fantasy cooked up in a back room on the project list of PLG. This is reality of our funding situation. This is not a situation where you turn around and say, oh, we have only spent this amount of money, but we have all this other here. Now, what I realize this context for you is actually giving you an opportunity. Because the reality is, no matter what anybody says, no matter what anybody's going to do, there's going to be more money for transit. That 12% is going to increase. We're going to have a debate as a community about by how much. And the question that this board has to ask itself is, what is its role in that debate? And needs to stake out its role. Now, some are going to want to continue to focus in the same percentages on roads. There was a presentation given to the TED PLG not too long ago that suggested $160 million more in roads need to be spent. 200 miles of new road widenings each year. There is also the reality that the MPO survey put out, if you fill it out tomorrow, the best you can do is cut from the 2010 plan of transit by 59%. If you fund every single project in the survey in the MPO plan right now, you're cutting transit from 2010 in terms of dollars by 59%. But no one on this planet is arguing we should go back to the voters and say, hey, let's do 63 miles of rail. Literally no one has suggested that. But we have suggested, and we've heard questions about, can we do BRT, airport shuttles, community circulators, all kinds of concepts that some of which are in the TDP, and real BRT and additional circulators, they're not. And so if we're going to look at it and we're going to say, let's not cut by 59% from 2010, let's cut by 30%, which would be nice, or maybe even better off what we should be doing, which is somewhere around a 10 to 15, then we can fund tons of bus service. Sure, we can do a rail line, but honestly, it would cost less than a third of what we should be doing in bus service. And what we're suggesting that you guys do today is take the lead. I'm not asking you to resist the TED PLG. 3 of you are members of it. That's ridiculous. What I'm asking this board to do for however long you sit together is take the lead. That's what the TED PLG challenged this board to do, and I'm challenging you to do the same. You already have a great finance team. You've already won a federal grant for the ferry that you have to implement. You've already got a first step forward in the transportation development plan for the next 10 years, but make that the first step. You've already asked, and the staff has answered and giving more planning money, so you guys are ready to look at more service. But you know what? Here's the deal. None of this is enough. As members of this board, whether you sit at the county or you sit on this board, what we're suggesting you do today is, instead of stand here and say, let's reformat this board and figure out later, let's figure out later in terms of our public outreach, I'm suggesting that this board today ask its CEO to ask the county commission for funds to do a year-long planning process, to jumpstart off of a draft plan that's supposed to be presented on August 12th, to really go out to the people and spend a year asking them what they want in transportation, and to take the lead in doing so. If you look at Houston, they went out and they asked people what they wanted without any additional money. They spent a year doing it. They didn't spend a few months. They didn't do a couple meetings. They didn't meet with a few Kiwanis clubs. They spent a year going to every single community. And if you look, HART already does this process. The 51LX, they're in the middle of the process right now, and it's going very well. They get a lot of people at their meetings. They've been doing this for years, and you guys should take the lead, ask for the money, say, hey, we gave you $9 million back in capital. We'd like some of that back so we can move it over to planning. Literally, what would that look like? Ask your CEO, what would that look like today, and take the lead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thurman. That was the last of our signed up members of the public that wanted to speak. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to speak that has not signed up? I see no one, board. Let's go on with our agenda. The first presentation we have is the Downtown Transit Assets and Opportunities Study. Mr. Clarendon is here from the MPO. Sir, welcome.
Greetings, Rich Clarendon with the Metropolitan Planning Organization staff.
I'm here to talk about the study that has gone on for the last 6 months or so, looking at transit assets in the downtown area and the immediate surrounding urban core. We call it the Transit Assets and Opportunity Study, and I'll explain why in a minute. So first of all, I wanted to recognize that we did have some funding support from the Downtown Partnership, the Tampa's Downtown Partnership. They are our co-sponsor, and we also had support from your staff serving on the project management team, as well as the Florida DOT, the City of Tampa, the Downtown Partnership, and the Streetcar Board. So we had a fairly dynamic group of individuals that helped us through this study. We are looking at this from the standpoint of what we can do to build on what we have in the downtown area. There's a lot of things going on that frankly didn't exist a few years ago. We've got folks, a burgeoning downtown residential community that we want to serve. We want to seek out opportunities to serve populations that maybe we don't serve or don't serve effectively today. There are a number of transit lines as well as rail lines that converge in the downtown area. Some of these are well used, some of them are not so well used. We want to see what we can do with those. And we want to basically reinforce downtown Tampa and the urban core as a place to not only work, but also live and to play. So in terms of our goals and objectives, we want to start from the downtown area and see if we can build outwards into a regional system, really taking what we have and regionalize it. This is important from both from the standpoint of serving the overall community and county, as well as securing funding especially from the state level. We want to leverage the existing rail infrastructure if that's possible. There are some underutilized rail lines coming into downtown that we want to take a look at. We want to find some lower cost options. So as opposed to starting with a grandiose vision and seeing what we could do with that, we're starting from sort of a small, more incremental approach, maybe a more modest approach, and see what we can do to build cost-effective solutions. Ultimately, we want to identify some projects that will find their way into the planning process, both the 2040 long-range plan that the MPO is working on, as well as shorter-range projects for your own transit development plan, as an example. We want to try to maximize the use of the transit assets that we have downtown. There are a lot of things there are a lot of services and lines that serve downtown. One thing we heard again and again is that they're rather limited in terms of hours of service, for example, and frequency of service. We want to see if we can expand transit markets. There are some pockets of areas where we think that it would be productive to extend transit service or reinforce transit. We want to identify opportunities for integrating bus and rail services more effectively. We do have an existing rail line in the form of the streetcar system. It does tie in at certain key places with the bus system, but we want to reinforce that and make it easier for folks to transfer from one to the other. Make use of, as I said, some of the freight rail lines that go through downtown and extend both westward as well as northward. Integrating those with the bus service. We want to create some revenue opportunities if we can for the streetcar system. Perhaps that takes the form of some public-private partnerships and transit-oriented development. And also try to see if we can use transit as a springboard or a stimulus for some redevelopment activities in the downtown area and urban core. This just looks at some existing development patterns, starting with some of the residential areas. I'm sorry, starting with the commercial areas. As you know, downtown is sort of the commercial office hub. It's growing, as is the West Shore area. Those are the two biggest concentrations that we're showing here. Residential, though, is not too far behind. A lot of multifamily development taking place in the downtown core, as well as in West Shore, and frankly, those didn't exist 10 years ago. So we want to see if we can take advantage of that. Retail opportunities are focused a little bit more on some of the major corridors, but we do have some burgeoning retail developments taking place in the West Shore area particularly. Over in Ybor is the IKEA complex. That didn't exist a few years ago. Again, these are all potential transit generators. This shows some redevelopment potential, vacant areas, parcels that could be redeveloped, particularly in the downtown core and northward and westward. Some of these are already happening with the emerging developments taking place around the downtown area and across the river in the West Bank area. Channel District is developed and continues to grow. The area that's shown sort of outline in the upper left-hand portion of this slide is the footprint of the downtown intermodal center. That's the site that DOT has acquired originally for high-speed rail. It's now in state hands, and we think it's important to try to link to that site. So what did we look at? What modes were considered? We looked at some of the rail modes, including light rail, as well as what's called modern streetcar, or as we like to call it, a modern tram. That's a lighter form of rail, doesn't require as much energy to propel. It's a little nimbler, can get around corners a little bit more easily, and is less expensive. We also looked at some of the newer diesel multiple units. These are self-propelled diesel powered rail cars that can operate in a shared freight line environment. So these are certified by the Federal Rail Administration to operate in conjunction with freight rail traffic. We also considered some of the rubber tired modes, including the traditional standard bus, as well as some of the trolley type vehicles, open air vehicles. These have some potential. We have some private operators using some of the trolley type vehicles over in the Clearwater and Tarpon Springs area, and we think that's a potential that needs to be looked at as well. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through our process, other than to mention that we did look at a number of what we're calling system alternatives, where we can combine different lines, rail lines, converging on the downtown area, tying into the streetcar system, either converting it to light rail or one of these other modes, or using it in conjunction with those modes. We also looked at the existing CSX corridor going northward to the university area. This would be primarily in the realm of the diesel multiple units. And these were evaluated both from a technical perspective, is it feasible from an engineering perspective? Is the right-of-way available? What would it do for redevelopment potentials? What are some of the costs involved, both from the capital and operating perspective? The three that seem to make the most sense are shown here, 5, 6, and 7. Those are the ones that sort of bubble to the top. So what are the options then when we look at those and refine those? Well, starting from options going west, we looked at the potential to use the transit envelope that exists in the 275 median. This is the stretch of I-275 that's under construction now. It will have a 48-foot transit envelope in the middle of it. We think it's important to take advantage of that if possible. Working from the West Shore Regional Intermodal Center, in the 275 meeting over to Howard Armenia, and then moving up to the Main Street corridor to serve the West Bank development, back down through the north of the Julian Lane Park, into the downtown area over the in the Laurel Street vicinity to tie into that yellow area, which is the site of the downtown intermodal center, and then tying into the existing streetcar system via Marion Street as an example. Hours of service would be about 18 and a half hours during the week and 14 hours on Saturday and Sunday, operating at a fairly frequent basis during the peak periods, morning and afternoon, 30 minutes during the off-peak. These are some of the costs, and as you can see, the modern tram or modern streetcar does save you somewhere in the vicinity of $84 to $100 million. It's a little less expensive to operate as well. One of the significant advantages of this is that it would allow us, for example, a one-seat ride from the convention center and the cruise terminals all the way out to the West Shore area, where it potentially tie into the automated guideway system that the Aviation Authority is contemplating to get people over to the airport. This would be a one-seat ride, potentially from downtown to West Shore in as little as 15 minutes. Options going north, we're looking at two. One that would utilize the CSX corridor. We have not entered into or discussed this at all with CSX, so it's important to realize that this is all based on the assumption that that could be made available. But we also looked at an alternative if that eventuality did not come to pass, and this would be a line that would run up Florida Avenue over to Bush Boulevard and then up to 30th Street to get up to the university area. So the blue line would represent the DMU, and the red line would represent either light rail or the modern tram. Again, the hours of service match those on the west corridor. Same with the frequency. These are the projected costs, both from the standpoint of the diesel multiple units as well as the modern tram. And as you can see, the DMU capital costs are about a third to a half of the costs of previous light rail proposals serving that same corridor. Now, a note on the freight rail assumptions. As I indicated, we have not talked to CSX. We know that the state is looking at some of these rail corridors and has engaged with CSX to start looking at that. What's shown in yellow here is what we would require for those corridors that I just outlined for you. We don't know what it's going to cost to acquire, but if we took the example of what happened over in Orlando with the Sunrail system and applied some of those same cost factors, we come up with a cost of somewhere between 21 and 43 million for the right to use those rail lines. Again, this is all based on just taking those cost assumptions. I wanted to mention quickly the rubber-tired, rubber-wheeled options. These are basically looking at a downtown circulation system that's a little more robust than what we have today. And what we have today is shown in blue here. It's the in-town trolley. It runs 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, fairly limited service. We would suggest upping that to operate more like a real transit circulator, perhaps 15 hours a day, Monday through Saturday, a little less of a span of service on Sundays, and a fairly frequent level of frequency. We are looking at some cost factors here, both for the capital as well as operating costs, to beef up that blue line. Is shown here as phase one, and then phase two would be complementing that north-south blue line with a red line that runs basically along Jackson and Kennedy connecting the Channel District and the streetcar line there westward over to the river. That's phase 2, and a potential third connection would be going across the river in the green. We're calling that the west option or the UT option, and that's one of those pockets of population that we think could be better served. We know there's some student travel that takes place through the downtown area, and that's a potential market. So when you put it together with some other things that are going on in the region, what do you get? We are trying to, as I say, build on current assets here, utilizing the existing streetcar alignments, taking advantage, if we can, of the CSX corridor, connecting over to West Shore to the airport people mover extension that's shown in yellow there, making use of the I-275 transit envelope, and using the Marion Street Transit Way. It's already an existing transit facility dedicated to transit. Future connections perhaps would utilize the Howard Franklin Bridge to bring service over to Pinellas or from Pinellas to here. The I-4 right-of-way is also available as a transit envelope, and perhaps would bring service over from Orlando into downtown. And then connections on the CSX corridor north into Pasco and even up to Brooksville, as well as westward over to West Chase and potentially Pinellas. So there are some real potentials to grow beyond just the corridors that we were looking at in this study. And so basically that's what I wanted to present to you. This is a draft study at this point. It does set the stage for developing projects and perhaps including them for future study, further analysis, and project development, but it needs to be included in the long-range plan in some form or fashion in order to do that. And with that, I'll see if there are any questions, and thank you for your time.
Clarendon, I've got Ms. Davin, Mr. Poseen, and then Ms. Merman. Thank you. Go ahead.
My question, thank you for that presentation. My question is really more to our own CEO than to Mr. Clarendon. How much interplay was there between HART and the consultant and the MPO as these thoughts were developed?
The MPO obviously is taking the lead role in the long-range planning, but staff did work very closely with the MPO in evaluating costs associated with the rubber wheel transit, basing it essentially on our trolley services, and also folding this into where does our 10-year adopted TDP take us? What sort of transit service do we already have planned? What demand were we seeing in the downtown area and the service coming up? So we have worked very closely with the MPO, but again, this is an MPO project, and since it's one that we're supporting as opposed to a HART project, it was appropriate for the MPO to take a lead role on it.
Well, I'm having a hard time figuring out where this is going to fit within all the other planning that's going on. I mean, are we doing another silo or subway approach again? How does this fit into where we are right now in looking at the entire county need, in looking at how we're going to best utilize dollars, and also in looking at how we're going to allocate dollars that might become available through a referendum process? Where does this fit in that?
Maybe you might want to suggest Mr. Clarendon answer that question. Because it looked to me, and Mr. Clarendon, correct me if I'm wrong, and I apologize for interrupting everyone else, but this was something that the Downtown Partnership was looking at primarily, as opposed to it coming from any other source. Is that correct? You're just a planning agency that's been asked by another group to put this together.
Well, that's correct. We are looking at something that potentially could identify some corridors for future development as a long-range planning project. I don't think that anybody's suggesting that this would happen anytime in the near term. In fact, if we had all the dollars in the world and the consensus to move forward, it would probably be 7 to 10 years before any of this materialized. So I don't think it's a project that's likely to happen in the near term, but we do need, if we are going to move forward with any kind of study or analysis of how you connect downtown to the larger region, it does need to be identified as a corridor for project development in our planning, in our long-range plan. That is the first step and really sends a signal to our partners at both at the federal and the state level that we're interested in this, and more importantly, where we have rights of way that are available and reserved for transit, that we stake a claim and say this is what we want to use for some sort of future transit way.
Well, I was being guided by the last sentence. Recommendations are anticipated to feed into the MPO long-range plan. So I, obviously, just looking at this, I don't have a position on anything one way or another, but I'm very concerned about how this is going to fit into everything else.
All right. We, in this order, Dr. Posey, Commissioner Merman, then Commissioner Beckner. And then Mr. Roche.
Richard, originally when this was initiated, the concept was to look at, what opportunities there might be to leverage the streetcar, but also to look at what's going to be required to sustain the streetcar. And I understand that at least some of that work's being handled separately by the city, but a core concern that I had originally is we've now exhausted the endowment fund for the streetcar, and we know that we'll have some non-trivial maintenance just to sustain that. Where are we at in understanding that as a base case?
Well, you're asking me to comment on the work that the city commissioned, which I know that work has been concluded and I think provided to your staff. I haven't seen their report, so I really can't answer that question.
Because I think that it's important to understand that, we've got an existing asset that doesn't have an operating funding stream and has a maintenance need, routine maintenance, but that's not trivial because it's reaching about the midpoint of some of the life elements. So I think that needs to be kind of coupled with this, because if what we learn about that might influence, and the costs of that need to be added to the costs of whatever proposals. Do you know what the maximum possible functioning headway is of the streetcar system since it's single track, two-way operation?
I'm going to take a guess here, and I'm going to wait for somebody from HART staff to correct me, but I'm thinking it's about 10 minutes.
Okay.
10-minute headways.
It would be, okay.
We run 10 minutes during Gasparilla.
Okay.
And I mean, the peak of the peak, it does, of course, ridership drag it down, but 10 minutes is about the best we can do.
Okay.
Commissioner Merman, are you done?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. My question will be short because it was the same question that Commissioner Davin asked you. I guess I got concerned after the third slide where it said identify projects for the 2040 transportation plan and the HART 10-year transit development plan. And I guess that's my confusion is, how is this integrating into what the city and county are doing? Because if anything came out of our policy group discussion is that federal, state, local all need to work together on planning and executing and spending our dollars. And this, I mean, I don't have this looks like it gets into a little more detail, though it does look repetitive to the analysis they did on the economic development centers that we did in the policy group. But I guess my wishes are is I just hope that we're all working together, that we're coordinating, that it's fitting in. Because at the end of the day, it's our local tax dollars that are going to be spent. It's not the federal and the state. Federal and state will give us money, but only if it's part of a coordinated system. And I don't see that per se in this report. Maybe I'm missing something, but I think it all has to work together.
Ms. Egan, did you have a question about that? After the question. Okay, good. Are you done, Ms.? Yeah, okay.
Well, and to Ms. Davis and Commissioner Merman's point, when we talk about a big comprehensive transit plan of rolling everything in together, often we default back to what was developed in 2010 leading up to the last referendum, where there was a big comprehensive outreach and then planning focus that HART staff liaised with consultants who are very good at doing this nationwide with economic development impacts and the whole nine. That document does not exist now because it hasn't come up. There has not been the discussion pushing it. So we do have a TDP plan. We have status quo and vision, of course, and later today we'll touch back on some of the data we shared last month to get your feedback of where else to go. We have the MPO looking at a long-range format, city and county projects, but a central plan where all of this rolls in together to what happens specific to transit does not exist in the county. And it doesn't exist because it has not been kicked off as a process to pull it all together into one blueprint, one hymnal, so everybody's referring back to the same thing of what happens in 3 years, or 5 or 10 or 15. It doesn't exist.
Can I have a follow-up?
It is exactly what he said.
Take the lead, get some planning money, and move ahead, everybody on the train.
But the thing is if the MPO as the planning organization would work with all of us in a coordinated fashion, we would have one plan. But it doesn't seem like I mean, if you just take this on face value, it looks like, you know, we're back to square one, where I remember in the policy group discussion, remember this, when they had the list of the 10 agencies that were all doing their separate little things, and they had their own little plans, and that's why we couldn't get anything done here, because we weren't coordinated. Nobody was talking to anybody, and we're trying to change that in the policy group. I know Catherine's been very forthcoming in working with our policy leadership group, and that the TDP that she has, I know is incorporated into the one plan. But I just don't see the coordination at this point, though I'm not saying that it can't. It's not here. If you take this report at face value, it doesn't look like it's coordinated.
Okay, Dr. Posey, wait, hey.
I wouldn't want to be misunderstood in my comments.
Oh, no, I understand.
I commend
Yeah.
the downtown partnership for getting involved. I think that's great, and I commend you all for carrying it forward. I think my concern is that this gets folded into and evaluated in a larger context.
And that's really likewise. I mean, we're really singing off the same page here. I'm not discounting what's in here. It's just coordination of it.
If I could, Dr. Posey, Mr. Clarendon, you wanted to say something, I think, in response to that, or?
I'll wait until after
Okay, and Dr. Posey, if I could get Mr. Beckner on here first, and then we'll go on from there. I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Beckner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I understand, what I'm trying to figure out, Richard, is number one, when we have the evaluation of alternative results, and you chose 5, 6, and 7, what does that signify when you chose those 3 versus 2 versus 4? What do those all say together, if that makes sense?
Right. Well, the criteria, the main criteria that we were looking at was, first of all, from an engineering perspective, is it even feasible to use some of these lines with the modes that were being considered? Is there right-of-way? Are there engineering constraints? Can you make the corner, the turn radius? And then we looked at, as sort of a more of a qualitative assessment, are we serving the markets that we need to? Will there be an opportunity to promote and stimulate redevelopment? How does it connect to other modes? Can we connect or integrate with the existing bus system? And that's an important ingredient here that I think we recognize very quickly. Downtown has a lot of bus service coming into it. But when you look at the frequencies and the hours of service, there are a lot of areas that would benefit from having more frequent and longer hours of service, so that, for example, people that work downtown later into the evening can get home. So those are some of the technical things that we looked at. We also looked at some of the costs and to see if we were getting the best bang for the buck from a perspective of both operating and capital. So that's why those those, if you look at that evaluation, those were the system alternatives that seemed to measure up best.
So that I understand the overall goal of what those three systems would do, I'm looking at the last slide where it says potential regional connections. Is this what those three systems are supposed to yield? Is that last slide? What I'm trying to understand is if you could review one more time the overall goals of what you're proposing is do. It says begin regional transit network starting downtown, and then what is all of this putting together accomplish? That's what I want to try to understand first.
It provides a core system of fixed guideway premium transit leading to and through downtown and connecting outward to our two largest activity centers, economic development activity centers in West Shore and the USF area. So it really serves the heart of the region.
So downtown, West Shore, USF.
Correct.
Okay, all right. And then so if what you're saying is that from your analysis, the alternative 5, 6, and 7 accomplishes that overall goal.
When we started to put these possibilities together, those are the ones that seem to do that best. We did have a stakeholder group that met 4 times throughout this process, made up of some downtown interests and public agencies. The county was part of that. They helped us refine those alternatives. That's when we ended up with those options going west and options going north.
All right, and then as far as modes to accomplish that, can you review one more time what 5, 6, and 7, what modes of transportation would that include?
That would consist of both the diesel multiple unit mode going north on the existing CSX track and light rail or modern tram or streetcar on the lines that don't use CSX.
Okay, so this is an overall regional connection from downtown USF or West Shore USF. We have not overlaid or integrated this with our current busing system to figure out how all that connects. Is that right?
Well, that would be part of the next step, and one reason we want to see if we can move this into the long-range plan so that we could do just that and make sure that, for example, if we have a bus line that intersects one of those potential rail stops, that it feeds that rail system.
All right, and then the last part of this, as far as the capital cost, from my understanding, on the higher end, we're looking a little over $3 billion to do that. Is that the capital outlay?
That was, no, sir. I would refer you, I guess, to the slides where we were looking at the options going north and options going west. The higher level costs that you were mentioning in that slide were just for comparison of those overall systems. When we refined it and looked at the light rail and modern streetcar costs, for example, going west, the light rail costs were somewhere in the range of $400 to $525 million. The modern streetcar is $320 to $420 million. On the options going north, the DMU capital costs were somewhere between $175 and $228 million, whereas the modern streetcar, $280 to $360 million.
So I put all those together because I don't have I'm trying to do the calculator in my head where we got 1.2, 1.3 billion, somewhere in there.
Probably less than $1 billion. I haven't, done the math to add up each possible permutation.
I'm just trying right now to wrap this all up in my mind so I know what's the capital outlay and what's the potential operating, would you say?
Well, if we took, for example, the modern streetcar capital costs of $420 million for the options going west and added it to the modern streetcar capital costs going north of $360 million, you'd be somewhere in the range of about $700 million just for that, those two corridors. I should emphasize, however, that these corridors don't have to be developed simultaneously and most likely wouldn't be developed simultaneously. You'd start with one, and so it would be developed incrementally.
And then operating is about how much?
For, again, just taking the modern tram, $5.7 million plus $4 million, somewhere in the range of $9.7 million operating.
All right, so about 700 million for capital and about 9.7 million for operating for what you're recommending from this.
That's what would result if these were to materialize just the way they're shown here.
Okay, and I'll just conclude that I would also think it's very important that we see the overlay and how this connects everything else, which I think is what you want to get to in the next step.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, just to address the coordination with the county and the policy leadership group, we have been talking quite a bit with staff at the staff level. Hope to be able to present, the transit components as part of the overall plan or transit element at your next meeting, which I think is planned for August 12th, I believe.
Okay. Mr. Roche? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The MPO, their region is Hillsborough County, is that correct?
That's correct. We
Okay.
cover Hillsborough County.
Okay, so similar to our regional transit agency here. You start out by saying the scope, the whole purpose of this study in your very first slide is to leverage existing rail infrastructure. I'm just curious, why is that your priority to leverage rail?
Well, that's a very good question. The reasons basically are that, we have some underutilized assets. Rail's one of them. Rail is one of those modes that can operate independent of traffic on surface streets. And we know we're going to have a problem, even with all of the improvements that are taking place, that are construction that's going on now, for example, on the 275 corridor. Even when that's done, we will still, over the next 20, 25 years, be facing fairly congested level of service on those roadways. So we're looking for other alternatives to put fixed guideway, premium transit, connecting some of our major hubs, activity centers where we know there's a lot of travel demand.
And have you, with this plan and the three alternatives that you're going towards, have you applied any ridership numbers to those to see how effective they could be?
Well, we have ridership numbers from the last long-range plans that we've done. We're still working in sort of an overall regional context. As some of you may know, when we do ridership forecasting, it's not done in isolation. We look at the overall region. In fact, it's a multi-county model that's used. We do that in collaboration with the Florida DOT and some of our other regional county partners. We haven't gotten to the point of actually coming down to a model projection for this yet, but I can tell you from the standpoint of the last plan, we were pulling numbers somewhere in the 15 to 20,000 riders per day vicinity for these corridors.
And you're saying here that you're identifying projects for the 10-year TDP, and I have part of the TDP here. Did you consult the TDP and kind of look at maybe what is already included in our plan that we might be duplicating to see if some of your alternatives would be, duplicating existing plans?
We looked at the previously adopted transit development plan. I know you've got one that's in development now, and we're hoping that whatever can be afforded and can be done in the near term would find its way into the next iteration of the TDP.
Because the TDP, we put this together every 5 years, as you probably know, and we did a major update in 2011. Every year we do a minor update, and part of that process is we do public hearings. We actually do, I understand, seek input from the MPO in developing this plan. The nice thing about this plan is it doubles transit throughout the county. And that's one thing I'm a little troubled about with this study, is if you look, it's kind of myopic where it's just looking at a small section of the county in general. And yet, even for some of the lower cost alternatives that are looking feasible, it would require to eat the entire apple of the 1% sales tax that could go to fund the rest of the county. Possibly not all the way up to the penny, but very close up to, and you're pretty much limiting yourself then either to get our existing TDP implemented or it seriously affects the reach throughout the county, which we both have the same region to service. The TDP that has the 6 metro rapids, if you look at our vision plan, the capital costs are significant. They're a fraction of what even the lowest cost alternative is on this plan here that's just downtown. And it's very equitable. This downtown plan that you just presented really is a very limited scope versus the TDP it spreads out spines throughout the county, and it, I think, would really improve mobility. So that's something I would definitely consider. The other thing about this TDP is over half of it is within the city limits. It doesn't define itself to the downtown corridor. You have City of Tampa residents that live, near McDill. You have some that live up in New Tampa, and all of them would be serviced. Even the Metro Rapid East-West, there's a section of eastern parts of the city that would get service that may not be able to get funded if this rail plan were to kind of take up the bulk of the transportation tax. So those are just some of my concerns. And then on a couple of slides further down, the one where you have options going north, you have 2 alternatives. One is the CSX tracks that use the DMU. I'm concerned because you have not entered into discussions, and I realize this is, very early in the stage, but I think one of the lessons that we learned from the last referendum is that CSX was not, going to give up their private property without a, buffer of some sort. I believe it was a 25-foot clearance from, which I think might potentially bump up, some of the costs. And then the other alternative, if the CSX tracks are not viable, it's pretty much an overlay of our existing Metro Rapid north-south, which is very popular, has been doing exceedingly well. So I would just take those points into consideration as well. And I have more things, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Roche. Before I go to you, Dr. Posing, if I could, I haven't spoken yet, I'd like to say a couple things. First of all, Mr. Clarendon, I just want to make sure that we're right about this, because I think there's a little bit of confusion in the room when MPO presents things to us. This plan was specifically asked for by the Downtown Partnership, correct? In partnership with MPO. You got input from us in the City of Tampa and some other places in order to do the plan, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, the reason I say that is because this is the reason why it's not part of the TDP and everything else is that, did I just say TDP? Did I say it right? Okay, I want to make sure. We'll screw that up because I say TPD. Anyway, the reason I think that you need to clarify this is that we do these studies all the time. We did a study from the Streetcar Board, did a study with MPO to see about extending the line. There's a lot of things that we do that never get into the transit development plan. So I just want to make sure that folks understand. Now, I do have a question about the direction that you took the plan, and here's the question. Mr. Roche touched on it just a little bit, which is you identified our east-west, the corridor that goes along 275. Was there any thought of bus rapid transit as part of using that as opposed to rail in the interim, until we have rail, or was there any discussion about that? Because it did say that other modes were studied, like, and you did mention circulators and you did mention rubber reel. Was there any talk about that, or?
Well, the 275 corridor actually will have lanes for, what are called managed lanes, and we are, in fact, looking at potential for bus rapid transit using those managed lanes. But that's a much larger, system. It's got, services from coming actually out of Hillsborough County, from Pasco, for example, southward into the downtown area, and then out towards West Shore. It's a fairly limited type of service because the access points are limited in Hillsborough County, somewhere up in the Fowler area, downtown and West Shore.
I'm sorry, let me just interrupt you for a second. The question I asked you was, did you study BRT in that thing? And the reason I'm asking is this, and it's a very simple question, which is, we understand that the legislature and the head of the Transportation Committee in the legislature is not a rail fan, okay? So if we're going to put something in the middle of 275, if we don't have buy-in from FDOT, it doesn't really matter if we say we want to put it in there unless we've got, somebody on our side at FDOT that's willing to say, yeah, you put rail down here. It's just, I know that this is an alternative study, meaning that here are our assets, this is what we can do if we want to. And I'm not saying that you should have everything completely solidified,
Right.
but I'm just asking the question about that alternative in addition to some of the other alternatives that you put forward concerning rail. And again, for me, you've got to look at everything because we don't know where we're going right now. We don't know where the money's going to come from. We don't know what this is going to look like. So when the partnership is looking at it, was part of your mission to look only at rail, or was it to look at all those alternatives, including BRT? That's a simpler question, I think.
Yeah, frankly, we did not look at the potential for BRT between downtown and West Shore because we knew this other effort was going on.
Okay, all right.
So that's the short answer.
That's the best. Short answers are the best answers, by the way. So, the couple other things I just wanted to ask you concerning, the options going north and the DMU and the modern tram and some other stuff. Using existing lines, do you all do any study at all in terms of economic development opportunities along those lines as opposed to building our own lines? Because here's the thing, we know that there's a real cost associated with dealing with CSX. And is it better to just do your own lines in order to get the most bang for your buck as opposed to purchasing the right-of-way from CSX? Was there any, development of that in terms of how you put that plan together, or?
Well, I think there's going to be a cost regardless of whether you're in the CSX right away or not. The trade-off is that in one case you have an existing, somewhat underutilized rail corridor that could be used. Obviously, there will be a cost to it. As you say, CSX is not going to let that go lightly, but they may not let it go at all. That's why we were looking at some alternatives that don't rely on CSX. And as far as whether or not the cost trade-off, I mean, this is also highly speculative because until you actually sit down and negotiate in earnest, you won't ever come to a dollar figure to make that sort of calculation. Therefore, I think it's important to continue to have these non-CSX corridors identified as backup to give yourself a potential. The state is looking together with CSX at what could be done in this region. We were advised, don't get into that mix. Let those conversations proceed, and we're just going to have to wait and see what comes out of that.
One last question. I apologize, Dr. Posing. You're jumping out of your skin or out of your suit or something over here. I apologize. Well, just one last question. You mentioned about what the cost was at Sunrail in terms of dealing with CSX. What's the cost that has been proposed at Greenlight? I had heard some numbers. I think they're similar, but I'm not sure if you know those.
I don't want to quote something and be proven wrong later, so I'm going to take a pass on that.
We do that all the time here, so that's okay. Yeah, I mean, you have no idea, or?
Well, I'm sure it's in the billions, and we're trying to come up with something that
not even as a price per mile. You don't have any idea.
It's light rail. Typically, those are 50, 60 million per mile.
Okay. All right, thank you. Dr. Posey, I apologize again.
Yeah, no problem. A couple things. I'm glad they did the study because they threw some ideas on the table that hadn't been in the table before. It was a modest study, short in duration, and it was what I would characterize as something of a sketch planning study. And the risk, I think, is that we treat any outcome of the study as somehow being cast in stone or an action plan going forward, because it is what the community doesn't have is a systems plan. We got lots of people studying lots of different things, many of which are competing in the same corridor for the same market, and frankly competing for the same resources. We know there's a strong north-south market. We know there's an east-west market, but we don't know what else. And the reality is, between now and this fall, we're not likely to know. So, I mean, the risk is that we commit to something for either the long-range plan or the TDP or the referendum or anything else that hasn't fully digested all of the different alternatives. I mean, if you just look at where we're at now compared to even as recently as a few years ago, this whole issue of express bus and managed lanes is a big deal. And when you say things like, oh, well, they're not going to have many access points, well, the community better start talking about that, because if we're going to run the service, we need access to it. And if that's going to be a major investment in the community, that needs to be integrated with the bus service and the concept plan. And because we can't, I mean, the idea that we're going to run express bus service in the freeway and parallel rail lines and parallel metro rapid lines is ridiculous. And so at some point in time, we need to integrate all these. And they're not easy decisions. I mean, if they were easy, we wouldn't have had multiple studies over time. We've got corridors just going from here to the airport, for example, anywhere from Kennedy to Martin Luther King, and, you know, neighborhood corridors and freeway median and all kinds of things. And the reality is we don't have a decision on those. We're not likely to have one soon. The demand forecasting work needs to be meticulous and updated and accurate, and needs to be done before decisions are made. I don't think we're close to having that done, is my understanding. But you know, we know some priority corridors, and we got lots of good ideas, and over time we'll sort through them and make some decisions. But the theory that we're somehow going to pick something between now and fall, I think is ill-conceived. I don't think that's likely to happen. That doesn't mean something shouldn't be in a long-range plan, but it does mean that I don't want to see us lock in something or create the expectation of something until a lot of this has been sorted out. And frankly, part of that sorting it out might mean get better bus service in there and see if the market responds before we get too far down the road on some of these capital-intensive things. So, thank you.
Okay. Sure, yes, Ms. Debbie. Turn on your microphone and you can speak. Because Lena's going to look at me and say, turtle.
I want to take a page out of Ms. Jarosz's approach. You know, if you go to some of the data that we get all the time, the kind of data that Dr. Polzin is talking about, just look at the express and limited express routes ridership. Everything isn't centered on getting from downtown west or from downtown north. Look at the numbers. The biggest ridership is the Fishhawk Inn. I mean, Dr. Polzin, I hope we just all put that across our foreheads. We need the specific ridership data. We need the projections of need before we go any further. And that is not, again, in any way critical of your study. I realize this was a quick 30,000-foot view. I understand that. But I think we keep looking at the glorious, wonderful things. And what we've got to remember is these are people trying to get from A to B. And how can we use the money that we're going to have to get them from A to B? And we can't use all the money, billions and billions, to build a track from here to there, and no one else anywhere in the county can get anywhere. So I think your caution is so well taken, and the points that Mr. Rose brought out are very well taken. We need a lot more data before we start making choices.
Okay. Commissioner Merman.
And to respond to that, I know that the county and city folks have been talking with several transit consultants and experts throughout the country to look at our total system to see what ridership might look like. And so I think all that will become available, but yes, you're right. We need a lot of data and research. We cannot propose any funding, any options, unless it is clearly backed by statistics, data, and demand. Because you're right, South County has gotten the short end of the stick, and I know this is ad nauseum. I'm hate to keep saying it. Eat Brandon. I mean, that whole section from north to south, from Wesley Chapel down 75 to 674 in Sun City Center, nothing. So that's what it boils down to.
Commissioner Sharp.
It just reinforces, though, what I think Mr. Thurman stated, and we need to be very clear. We do need to take the lead. The challenge is our planners there's just not many of them. We're limited. So I strongly support and have asked Mike Merrill, I've asked our staff over the last several months that the county step up and give immediately planning dollars to HART so they can begin doing the analysis and planning. And that way, then we would have our HART director, our HART chair, the board could be directing staff to look at all these different scenarios, and we would be taking the lead. And then we could look beyond the scope of the study, where it was very clear at the outset that the request was to look at the downtown assets. I always thought the title was kind of misleading, because the request from the downtown partnership was to look at the existing downtown assets. I can tell you that one gentleman who's very interested in this study is Mr. Vinnick, who's getting ready to spend a significant amount of money on downtown, and has stated you can't just rely on the automobile or FDOT to fix this problem. You're going to have to look at the existing transit, and then how we expand the existing transit systems and get riders to the different economic centers, which I would absolutely agree, Fishhawk, Brandon, needs to be included. But go back to whatever we need to do to make sure that Ms. Egan has what she needs to do the planning. I want to make sure that we're asking that, and that we collectively ask the county that they be forthcoming in planning dollars so that this board and Ms. Egan can immediately begin to hire the staff she needs to do the planning necessary to make sure that we then have exactly what we want.
Well, if
Mr.
you want
Roche.
to put that in the form of a motion, I'm ready.
Yes,
to second
ma'am.
it.
I put that in the form of a motion.
If I could, Mr. Rochester wanted to make a comment.
And I agree. I know that I think transit planners need to be doing all this, and there's a large distinction amongst planners, and just because you're a planner doesn't mean that you can do transit. But I would ask Mr. Sharp if I could, being chair of the MPO, does the MPO have any dollars that they could have? I know they have funds that go to a lot of planners. Is there any way the MPO could actually impart some of their dollars to HART staff for transit?
I can't respond. I don't know it seems like every agency has dollars squirreled away. I always go to Mr. Tremonti and ask him about planning dollars. I think, though, that Mr. Tremonti has expressed a strong interest in coordinating with HART and using both its existing assets in the form of planners and potentially dollars to coordinate with them. There has been an interest expressed by the policy leadership group in having the MPO operate under the arm of either the current HART or an expanded HART. I would love to see the MPO's resources used in a more direct way with the needs here of this agency. But I can't tell you if they've got planning dollars.
Yeah, I would just, I would like to maybe staff or you could maybe inquire of the MPO if they have any way that they could allocate some of their planning dollars to HART.
Well, maybe we can make that as a form of a motion, for us to direct it from HART to the MPO, so that we don't have these individual conversations as opposed to what he's going to do. So before Ms. Abbott, Ms. Berman, what question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think that should be the substitute motion, really, for what was made, is that you that we asked the MPO for planning dollars. But here's the deal, you guys. I mean, we've got so much planning going on, and it's starting to veer off the path. Why don't you just ask? I mean, the county has this great planning group right now. They've got HARTs in there, everybody's in there, MPO. Why are we asking for something separate to be done when we're trying to work on one plan at the county with the policy leadership group? That is what we have been working on for a whole year, is to try and get everybody on one page. And here we are, if we do this, we're going to be off on another page, not coordinated with all the other agencies. Now, agreed, once we come up with the concept from what the policy leadership group wants to do, and forget about the HART part of it, okay? I'm just thinking of what designs and the road analysis and the road option and proposals they're putting together. Then you have to take that and put more detail to it. And that's what you need the planning dollars for. But I don't think the county should pay for the planners. I think the MPO, if they put enough money into planning for this, certainly they've got some money to keep helping us. And certainly if they want to put their mark on this whole coordinated system that's coming out, I'm sure they'll come up with dollars that would be available. But I definitely don't think we should ask the county for planning dollars when it's clearly the function of the MPO or FDOT or TBARDA. They all have planning dollars. Why do you want to go? We have precious dollars, little dollars right now. So I guess I hate to keep saying this, but we're kind of veering off the path, trying to do our own thing again, and we've got to come together and all work together in a coordinated fashion.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Yorson and Ms. Harshart.
And I think there's not a whole lot of disagreement here between us, but I do recall hearing from Ms. Egan that transit planning budget is very slim. And in order to do some of the upfront work in the policy leadership group, to do the ridership study, to do the analysis of whatever comes up, that's just my point, that we need, I think we need HART transit planners involved in that part of the process.
Well, and to clarify, when we're talking to BARDA, we're talking FDOT, we're talking the MPO. These are longer range plans. This is, the 2040 plan the MPO is working on.
Exactly.
Your transit agency, where we are today, we are responsible for the short-term, the 3 to
Exactly.
5 year
Different.
plans and the improvements.
Different.
So we can go hand in glove with the MPO, but these short-term things that folks are going to see making a difference in their lives that build into these, they come from your transit agency. Things we're working on now, we let you know in the weekly about the RFI, which is looking at downtown and then airport to downtown circulator. That stuff which is short-term can be innovative. We look forward to getting information back on that. We also providing the planning support within our role as a streetcar operator, and we'll get you more information about a study which was awarded Friday for the next steps on how streetcar connects from the Whiting Station to the Marion Transit Center, because that's part and parcel of what we're doing in a 3 to 5 to 10 year window. So we are out there and aggressive in looking at what goes on short range, but there is no other entity that will do short range planning and make this happen if HART does not do that. Now, earlier this year, Commissioner Mermitt had asked us to put together a price tag to have a facilitator come in and lead us in a big, broad, county-wide outreach that was transit-focused. And at that time, we said a 3-cycle iteration of going to 15 different locations, according to our marketing contractor, would run about $120,000. Given that we are now getting some feedback that we should look broader, we should look at what exactly everybody wants, not just in transit, but in if you could dream and then how to make that realistic, we could still make that happen probably within $200,000. We'd have to go out on the street through our procurement process. But this is what your agency is good at, not just short term, but we're good at short term because it's informed by what our patrons are using. We honestly mean this. It's not our service. We run it, but our communities own it. The reason you haven't had complaints in 4 years is because this staff has been proactive out in the county. 2 years ago, we took service away from Sun City Center, and Sam Sudman thanked us because what he received on the 53LX met their needs. And we're seeing this borne out through the increased ridership in our past pilot program down in Sun City Center. We received an award last week. We also had in the weekly that COMTO, the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, recognized the chapter here in Central Florida as best in the country for grassroots effort. Mr. Burns from procurement is very intimately involved in this, and our own Carla Williams from community relations is a president of this chapter. This staff, this agency is fantastic, is getting out there, hearing what folks need, and then synthesizing what can deliver for that. Now, if folks want this and we can afford that, we definitely have our challenges, but that is the role that your transit agency should be taking.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop now.
Before we go on, for the sake of what we have next on our meeting agenda, any other comments, please, let's have brevity be the key to everything. Mr. Sharp and then Dr. Poseen, and let's try and move on with our agenda. Commissioner Sharp.
Just that the request for the study was made by the Downtown Partnership. Federal dollars were used. MPO has very specific long-range planning responsibilities. You must do the 2040 plan. That's what they did. I think that in order for Ms. Egan to do what she needs to do, and quite frankly, this fits neatly with what the policy leadership group has been saying, which is they want a more robust HART. No better way to have a more robust HART than a HART that's right now doing the planning. And I think that Mr. Merrill and the policy leadership group would be maybe not every one of them, but the majority would be supportive of moving forward and allowing HART to do its role in this whole conversation. HART's been a part of the policy leadership group from the beginning. What they've lacked is the transit planning money to do the element that Ms. Egan's been discussing. So I would make a motion that we ask the county to fund the HART so they can begin their planning immediately, which will be an element of the transit plan that the policy leadership group is putting forward. That transit plan is certainly not going to come from the county staff. They're going to be relying on these planners here to come up with a plan, but they don't have the resources. So I say let's ask them right now.
I think the motion makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. First of all,
I'll take that as a second, though. Go ahead.
that is, well, I'm coming up to a second.
Okay, go ahead.
In a second. If we are all looking towards a referendum in the near future, we've got to start forming up the components of it so that it can be then explained to the constituents out in the county, the people who are going to vote for it, the people who are going to ride it. So you're absolutely right. The county can't do the transit portion. The county can do the roads and bridge portion. Temple Terrace can do their road and bridge portion. But none of them have the expertise to do the transit portion. So why don't we get about right now starting the transit portion? Other questions are going to have to be resolved down the road. Governance is still a question that's got to be resolved. Timing is a question that's got to be resolved. How the actual tax apportionments are going to be made has got to be resolved. But that is no reason not to go forward right now with what Commissioner Sharp has proposed. I really commend you for making that motion. I think this might take us out of this kind of place we're in where nothing much is happening except a lot of wheels are being spun, and let us move forward. So I second it just with great enthusiasm.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Roche, I know that you had made a motion. Did you want to, before, not a motion, but you had made a suggestion. Did you want to?
I'm good with this.
Okay.
But could I?
Yes,
discuss?
please, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I just want to make clear, because I'm thinking maybe my definition of planning may not be what I'm hearing here, because what I'm hearing is more public involvement and outreach. To me, planning is doing the ridership studies and you know, some comments that I'm hearing is that we want to do public involvement. And maybe I'm wrong, and correct me if this is not where we're going, but it looks like we're looking to do public outreach of the policy leadership group's plan, which we don't even know what that plan is yet. So I was talking more about to be able to do more robust planning
Yes.
on our TDP and kind of the plans that we know that we've already got in place.
Well, and Mr. Roach, to clarify, there would be essentially two options, one being an outreach that would go out and talk to folks, because again, the TDP has been smaller outreach. It's been, hey, what do you think about what we're proposing? We have lacked the comprehensive focus of going out and saying, if you were unconstrained, if you could do this, if you could do that. It just that outreach doesn't exist. So that would be one thing, that it forms a foundation of where your planning information comes from. And it is lacking here in the county, just hasn't been done. That then is the foundation that you would do more robust planning on, of modeling, as Dr. Polzin had noted, and pulling it all together. But it is not something that we are staffed to do, and it is not something that has been undertaken by another entity.
Okay, before we vote on this, Dr. Polzin has been waiting longer than it took him to get his PhD. If you don't mind letting him go ahead and...
A quick comment. I very much support this. After the referendum, we cut staff, as everybody knows. We never replaced Mary Chevalier when she left. We've done a super job of doing short-range planning, and that's great, but we haven't been as apparent at the table as we should be to frankly represent the reality of costs and markets and service and et cetera. Philip said it, I've said it before. We got a lot of people that, and you can't, everybody's aspirational, everybody wants to be creative, but you need to bound it in reality if you want to have a good a plan that actually moves people as opposed to buys lots of toys. So we need to be careful, and we need people that understand transit and understand travel behavior and what will and won't work and how they can and can't be integrated. And so I'm all in favor. We need to build the capacity to do longer range planning, and not alone. We're obviously going to do it in partnership with entities in the community, but having that core knowledge of transit at the table is critical.
Okay, Commissioner Beckner, you have a question.
So for clarification, Commissioner Sharp, are these dollars for feasibility type studies modeling as Director Jarosh has suggested, or is this for outreach, or what is?
No, this is for the exact purpose that Ms. Jarosh outlined, although Ms. Egan has made clear that as part, even with the TDP, there were elements of that where they had to go out and talk with the public to get a sense of what the public's attitude is with regard to different elements. And so this would allow her to hire the transit planners, as Dr. Polzin clearly indicated, that's their job. And the beautiful thing is now it's this board helping to shape and guide and direct, not anyone else. It allows them to begin now and not wait.
And do we have, Ms. Egan, any idea of what type of dollars we'd be seeking from the county amount-wise?
Again, what we had priced out earlier this year for a countywide outreach was $120,000. That was very bus-focused for going and making sure we touch base everywhere. This sounds like a broader program, so we would say probably about $200,000. That would be facilitators doing the whole nine, so we'd be task ordering, contracting that out. Then a secondary function of that would be $200,000 to $300,000 for the planning focus to roll this all back together to come up with a solid transit document.
I asked Ms. Weiss for $2 million. I'm not sure. She's
we can spend that
aiming
too.
a little bit lower, but I thought a $2 million ceiling, and maybe we're looking at,
because the figures that I'm giving don't involve planning.
it was the ceiling. It was my ceiling. It was my ceiling.
Where are you gonna get?
So when we make the request to the county, I'm hearing figures of $500,000. Commissioner Sharp is saying $2 million.
He's the transit professional, so whatever she ultimately says, we'll do.
If
Why don't
I
we bring
could
something back
interrupt for
to
just a
more
moment. I mean,
structure?
let's talk about it. I understand your question. I think that the question should be that the professionals would ask, what is that number going to be? You're going to have to vote on that anyway at your board. So if you don't mind, we could move forward on the question itself, if that's okay.
So the question is, though, we're just writing a letter once we know then the specific amount? Is that, I just want to be clear in the motion. Of
Sure.
what we're,
I mean, I will entertain, the maker of the motion had said that, would you like a number attached to that first beforehand? Just ask for
Whatever she
that?
asked for, yes.
Okay. If we're ready to take the vote, I think we should.
Wait.
Wait a minute. Was the lawyer trying to get my attention? No, good. Mr. Roche, before I go, and now I'll go to Ms. Berman.
I just have a problem voting on an unknown number.
Got it.
can we at least
Well-
see, come back to this next month?
Well, I think we
with a-
can't. We've been talking about this for quite a while. I've asked our staff and Mr. Merrill for a period of time for the planning dollars. I was in jest stating that I'd given a significant number and said, look, HART gave back some money as part of the bus rapid transit plan. I wanted to see if we couldn't maybe shift some of the money back to HART to begin planning, and I had a dollar figure in mind. Ms. Egan, though, has been analyzing what she would be able to do with additional planners. I think she should be ready to give us at least a ballpark figure, because I know she's talked with Mr. Merrill and Bonnie Weiss, and I'm not sure whom else, about this very specific issue. I brought it back up again last week. So I'd like us to move forward and let Ms. Egan, if you could, maybe suggest an amount that you think is reasonable based upon your analysis. Are you prepared at this?
We definitely can, and allow me to suggest, the place to start is outreach, and then bringing that outreach into a plan that makes sense and is feasible. As Dr. Polzin noted earlier, and we're talking ridership and modeling, Tabarda spent $1.6 million on the Crystal River to USF connector, and $1 million of that was modeling on one narrow corridor. So modeling and kicking the tires can be as expensive or as inexpensive as a project decides they want to spend on that. Now, having made that comment, if you are looking for something which is heavily modeled, it will not be inexpensive. And I don't know that the board is saying, hey, produce something that's absolutely signed, sealed, and delivered. But what we can do is say, let's do outreach, and how to synthesize that outreach into a plan. We can put that together as a price tag. Conservatively, that's probably about $500,000 for both those components together. But to go beyond that, to produce this into a document that Dr. Polzin would allow us to put on our letterhead will involve more rigor, and then producing that into a final document is more. It depends on where the board wants to say this should land, and we can produce that information.
Well, it should land with enough information so that we can have a battle-tested, battle-ready plan for when we have our referendum. So, and the only agency that can provide that information is this agency.
Well, and for the sake of the argument that we're having right now, okay, because we don't have a referendum on the table and we don't have anything else, let's talk about specifics. Would you be happy to make the motion with the $500,000 as the first ask, so that we can move forward on this particular motion, as opposed to discussing it here? You're going to have to discuss it in your board anyway. There's no money to be had yet. So
I'd like to add to that also.
you want to offer a friendly amendment to the motion, go ahead.
I would like to add an amendment to the motion, that this study that will be done and the outreach will encompass also questions that the county would be out there asking. Remember, we talked before, last month's meeting, that the county was planning on having outreach meetings, and we were going to have outreach meetings. That's an awful lot. So I think that there ought to be implicit in this motion that for the transit portion of any referendum that might come up, it would be done with county participation.
That's,
well,
I mean, before she jumped in, I mean, honestly, the county, I think we've already spent 50 or 100,000 on outreach. Why are we, that's
If
my
I
whole-
could, just for a moment.
No,
Okay, Commissioner, let me just interrupt for a second, because I think, if you don't mind me saying, I think that we're mixing apples and oranges here. The planning dollars, if I'm correct about the maker of the motion, because I've been listening to everyone, is that it's for planning. It is not necessarily for a specific outreach or a specific plan. So for us to say, again, what we're talking about with the policy leadership group is different than what we're talking about here. It is not about that. Now, Ms. Davin had made a point about it. He hasn't accepted the motion of it. So you can vote up or down, whatever that motion may be. I'm thinking that we need to go forward on this. Does the maker of the motion accept the what was presented by Ms. Davin?
Yes, sir.
So, to reiterate, she wants more outreach used with those dollars that are going to be coming to HART. That's where we're at. You are on the county commissioner. If you want to vote against this motion and then the next motion that's before county commission, I think that's more than your prerogative to do so. I think that we're trying to talk too much about this. It is a simple thing. We have not had a planner since Mary left 3 years ago. And the planning portion of what we do here is more difficult because we do not have a planning staff. And that is the reason that Mr. Sharp made that motion, if I'm not mistaken. Has nothing to do with the policy leadership group, it has nothing to do with anything, because right now, nothing is coming out of PLG until it comes forward to us. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands that we're just talking about HART partnering with the county to get money in order to plan. And if it has to do with a referendum, fine. If it has nothing to do with a referendum, even better. We can go forward with it. We have money. We know what we're going to do. You know we have money to go forward for planning, whatever that is. And I think that's great. If you guys don't want to vote for the money at county commission, fine too. I mean, this is what it's all about. I think that you may be jumping the shark a little on this. All we're talking about is planning dollars. If I'm wrong about that, please tell me.
Okay.
And let's please get this vote going.
When I made the motion at the board meeting to do the outreach study and do.
You're talking about a county board?
No, this board.
Okay, outreach.
And it was because of the polk. The guy came here from the polk.
Yes.
I said, we need to do exactly that. You guys don't have the money. So I went to Merrill and said, and I finally convinced the PLG, we have to do this outreach study, whether it's here or there. So it's I think they're doing the same thing. We're coming to a crossroads here. I get it. But I'm going to say this motion needs to have included in it also asking the MPO for planning dollars, because I don't know where we're going to get $500,000 out of our budget right now. I really don't.
Commissioner, is that in the form of a friendly amendment to that motion?
It is a friendly amendment. Because I do
Mr. Maker,
think
would you
MPO
like that part of the amendment, sir?
I'd be more than happy to include in it that we ask the MPO to participate at whatever level they can. But I mean, if you're looking at budgets, county budget, MPO budget, county's got a bigger budget.
Yeah.
And the county has the resources to help us do this. And these are very different things that we're asking for. We're talking about the policy leadership group going out and doing outreach, which is very different than what Ms. Egan's discussing, which is getting into the details that Dr. Paulsing consistently states at every meeting we have to have in order to have a transit element of the larger plan. The policy leadership group doesn't have the skill, the expertise, the staff to even begin to do that analysis. That's what she's going to do. And she is working, our interim administrator is working with the policy leadership group and Mr. Merrill on shaping a plan. The problem is when I ask Mr. Merrill about the transit element, we don't have anybody who can give us any of the details because the details come from this group, but they don't have planning money, so they need planning money now.
Okay, Commissioner Sharp, let's get back in the lane. We have a motion, we have a second, we have a friendly amendment to the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No, we passed it unanimously. Thank you very much. And thank you, and listen, thank you for the discussion because this is important. This is one piece of it. The county commission, if they vote to include that, the MPO, if they vote to include it, let's hope we get more planning dollars because we definitely need it. We haven't had it for 3 years. All right, our next presentation is from Jeff on the proposed ad valorem tax millage rate for this coming fiscal year. Jeff.
Good morning again for the record. Jeff Seward, Chief Financial Officer, and I will move through this as quickly as possible. All right, pursuant to Florida Statute 200.65, HART and all tax levying agencies in the state of Florida are required to set the tentative millage or the not to exceed rate within 35 days of the certification of property valuation, which occurred on July 1st. We also need to set the rollback rate, set the date, time, and place for the 2 public hearings where the proposed millage rate and tentative budget will be considered. As part of today's package, the action requirement for this and resolution is there today for you to vote on. Staff recommendation, which are proposed budget, which will come forward to the FGA in August and subsequently to the 2 public hearings in September, is predicated on the millage remaining at 0.5 mils, setting the rollback rate of 0.4751, which is 4.98% below the proposed millage rate. And again, as a reminder, the rollback rate is what the millage would need to be set at this year to gain the same amount of revenue as we collected in the prior fiscal year. And we have tentatively scheduled our public hearings in coordination with the Property Appraiser's Office and other taxing agencies for the evening of September the 8th and September the 22nd. Now, in prior years, this discussion, we didn't really have a presentation on the tentative millage, but a couple of things transpired since the last board meeting concerning the budget, and I wanted to go over those briefly with you since this tentative millage is going to support this proposed budget. And this is our millage history. This is a slide that you have seen before. We're staying, the recommendation is to stay exactly where we have been since FY 2012, which is our charter limit. The setting of the tentative millage, again, proposed property values increased 7.33%. In all of our early budget modeling, we usually model at 3%. So early modeling and early revenue projections were quite under what we had modeled or what came in. So we're pleased with the way that the economy is driving the value back into both commercial and residential properties. Our increase in ad valorem revenue is right around $2.2 million for FY15. And if you look at the comparison between 14 and 15, this is where we stand going in based on a flat millage rate. Something that we've always done, or I've always done at the county level, was always to provide some type of snapshot of a proposed tax bill, knowing that the majority of all of our homes that are valued at $200,000 is a rarity now, but I wanted to show a non-homestead and homestead exemption impact to the homes based on the HART millage. Now, something that is actually very timely based on the conversations today on the amount of money spent on transportation, what we've done is actually taken a snapshot of all the ad valorem levying that's done in Hillsborough County and provided a quick overview of dicing up a dollar bill based on the percentage of the amount pro rata based on the amount of ad valorem levied and collecting. And what I'd like to be able to show on this slide, we've broken out into public school and the public school system, the county, the municipalities, other districts, and then where HART lies within the breakup of that dollar bill. And I think it's important to see that of all the ad valorem levied, of where HART is able to sustain the service that we have on this sliver of that component of revenue. Overall operating revenue, ad valorem again at 31.8 for next year, passenger fares at 16.6. The formula grant, 10.6, stays flat with this year. And as you'll see in a couple minutes, or the next slide, again, we are proposing that the amount of that formula grant over the next 5 years goes into the operating budget decrease and slide those dollars back over to our capital program. So, where do we stand right now, and what does this tentative millage support? If you recall, at the June board meeting, we presented a 5-year look ahead with a proposed FY15 budget that was required to use $500,000 out of fund balance to balance and to be able to come in statutorily on a non-deficit budget. We have been able to, through more LOSs, level of service reductions internally within HART, and the increase in ad valorem, we're able to report that we are not only going to be able to be balanced, but we are also anticipating a drop of $1.013 million into fund balance at the end of next fiscal year. So we will have more details on the exact breakdown of those dollars and how we were able to achieve those savings starting at the August FGA. But again, this tentative budget or tentative millage will be able to support continue meeting our reserve goals at HART. This 5-year look ahead, the out-year ad valorem based on where we are looking right now at the state level is now a conservative 4% growth rate per year. We have fair revenue. The fair revenue reflects increases in fares in FY16 and FY18, as well as additional revenue from our status quo service enhancements that are built in from the TDP. The formula begins the calibration at FY16. I had mentioned that before. If you look at the formula grant line, you notice each year beginning in FY16, that line item goes down each year. That's not due to the fact that we're getting less formula funding, but it's a redirection of that formula funding into our capital program as our operating budget is able to absorb. As you see, starting in FY17 through 19, we have operating deficits based on our status quo. We will tweak that formula funding necessary to be able to balance that going forwad, along with additional ad valorem revenues. Excuse me. This expenditure growth includes all the current and updated out-year status quo TDP that you will be seeing next month. And again, the 5-year look ahead represents a service model as it exists today, only with the status quo enhancements included. So what is this tentative millage in the budget support? This is the second consecutive year of building reserves while still enhancing service at the same time. We have provided for over a savings of $1 million through level of service reductions. We've added 19,000 hours of service enhancements to the current service. We've addressed employee needs, bargaining steps, and performance bonuses, as well as non-bargaining increases for next year, funding of new positions, and needed special projects to be able to maintain the momentum that we've started over the last year. Next steps, August 22nd, the full tentative proposed budget will go before the Finance, Governance, and Administrative Committee. September the 8th will be the first public hearing at 5:30 p.m. September 22nd, the second and final public hearing at 5:30 p.m. here at Ybor. And on October the 1st, fiscal year begins, and we will start initial tentative planning for FY16's budget.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Any questions? Dr. Posey.
Jeff, the ad valorem increase looked bigger than the last time you presented the budget to it. Is that correct?
It is. The last time we proposed was based on the preliminary property tax value.
But it wasn't at 5-point-something%?
It was almost 6%,
Right,
yes.
and it's up to
And it did go up.
even beyond what they said.
Correct.
Okay. And that fell through to the bottom line for the most part, to the reserves?
Yes, it did.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions of Jeff about his presentation? Okay. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. Al, get your presentation.
So moved. Would we need to vote on this?
Oh, you know what? We could vote on it right now on the action item if you want, or we can go to the presentation. So I don't know if we have everyone here necessary to vote. As I was going to say, I think Ms. Davin is right outside the door there. If someone from staff would tell Ms. Davin to come on in. And I don't know if Ms. Jarosh is coming back. It looks like her stuff is still here. Why don't we go to the presentation, then we can have Ms. Jarosh in the room at that time to vote on that. Thank you, Jeff. Sure. Appreciate it. Al, if you can make the presentation about the selection process for the federal and state legislative consulting services.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Al Burns, Senior Manager of Procurement and Contracts Administration for HART. This morning, I want to briefly go over the selection process for state and federal legislative consulting services. Our current contracts for federal expires in March 20th of 2015, and our state legislative expires in December 19th of this year. Board policy allows the board of directors to use one of two solicitation methods, either competitive or informal. In short, if it's informal, it will be shortlisted by the 3 firms that the board of directors wishes to use. Decisions that need to be made today, if possible: solicitation method, whether competitive or informal; term of the contract; evaluation committee members, staff, or board; members of the ad hoc committee. Staff recommends that we use the competitive solicitation process, 1 solicitation for both consultants. Evaluation criteria includes technical and price, 80% technical, 20% price, so firms can't come in and low bid. 1 contract awarded for each consultant. Term of 2-year base with 2 one-year options for a total of 4 years, versus last time, I believe we only did a one and one. The ad hoc committee in 2012 consisted of Councilmember Mike Suarez, Commissioner Sandra Merman, and Councilmember Ron Govan. Discussion.
Any questions of Al about the process? It's a process.
So Al, just to clarify, we've used all of our options then as far as for extensions? then?
Yes, sir. We did extend the Holland and Knight Federal Legislative Consulting Agreement until March 20th of next year.
Okay, thank you.
How about on the state, because they're brand new?
Yes, sir, but there aren't any options.
There is no 2-year option for them?
No, sir.
Got it.
And
Okay.
Councilman, we'd
Terrific.
also like to stress that the state contract expires in December.
Correct.
We would like to ask the ad hoc committee to discuss when you would like these contracts to turn over. Obviously, if the agency brings on a new state lobbyist and that person comes in and begins work in the middle of December, we have lost any ability to plan for the session.
Yeah.
Similarly, we had extended the federal contract through March to get us through reauthorization this year, but it's just a different place to land, so we would like to recommend the ad hoc committee discuss that.
Commissioner Beckner.
Is there a particular reason why we don't have an extension on the state contracts and we do on the federal?
We could extend the state contract per board policy for 90 days on the state if that's what the board wishes.
Well, but I mean, you've got, if I heard you right on the federal, you've got is it 2-year with
No,
an
sir.
extension?
Both the state and the federal consultants were both for the same term. I was instructed to exercise a 90-day extension on the federal legislative consulting.
Oh, for some reason, I heard you say that on the federal side, it was a 2-year contract with a year extension. Did I not hear that right?
I'm sorry.
Al, what are the
That's what I'm
terms?
proposing. Yes, sir. That's staff recommendation.
And Al, what are the terms of the current state and federal contracts?
I want to say it's one and one. I think it was 2 years ago we came and had to
So
do
both
this,
of
but
these were
staff
one
is
and one.
verifying that.
Okay, thank you.
Gotcha, okay, all right.
They should have given you a paper here. Yeah, I think
It was what?
It was an anomaly the last
Okay,
time.
all right.
We ended up with us not having.
Right.
they had to fall on there.
Okay.
Yeah,
It was one.
This is for
It was 1 and 1.
the state and the
Yeah,
federal?
here's your backup. Yeah.
And if my memory serves me right, the board of directors, since it was a new state, you wanted to be very conservative.
Right. Well, I can entertain any members that want to be part of that ad hoc committee to select this coming year. I think that part of the problem that we're going to have, and I think that the extension of the 90 days has kind of put us in a weird position with the federal one because we awarded them both at the same time last time. I may entertain a motion to maybe extend our state one to fall at the same time frame. The only problem is that that's the middle of session.
The middle of
And,
session.
so, we're kind of stuck betwixt and between in this sense, so. Commissioner Merman, you had a question.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm happy to be on the group, and I'll make the motion. I do think they both need to be on the same time schedule, but you can't extend the advocacy group contract and then have it end right in the middle of session. That's not going to work. So I think we're probably, unless you change the federal, but we can talk about it in our group. And also, I think there might be some other options. I want to look at how much we're spending. I'm very happy with Holland and Knight, but there are other, we can piggyback off other contracts that other agencies have too. That might help save us some money.
Okay.
Somebody that's really following the transportation thing.
Al, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, then what staff was going to do, or what staff proposes to do, is release both solicitations at the same time. It doesn't mean that the contracts will be awarded at different times. We could still have a concrete date on when we award both contracts, so they could both start at the same time, basically.
Well, I see that Commissioner Merman would like to be on the ad hoc committee. Anyone else? Commissioner Beckner, we are going to need a third, if anyone would be willing to do that.
I'll
Ms.
do it.
Ms. Davin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, are
And-
we going to get this done before October?
I was thinking too, we're not likely to.
Well, I would hope so. I think it's up to your work product of whether or not you get it done before October, but that'd be
Well, if you
that'd be
do
nice to do.
extensions, you may not.
Well, and here's the thing. I think that maybe if that committee would look at possibly extending to do it in this time frame each year, because here's the thing: we have a August recess for Congress, and then we also are out of the legislative session for the House and Senate of the legislature, state legislature. It makes it a little bit easier, I think, because then if we, in a hypothetical, decided to change our state contract, they come in December 20th, all right, committee week's already been started, and we're kind of in a weird position with that. So that's the only suggestion I would make to the ad hoc committee. We'll name the three members that were just mentioned, Ms. Davin, Commissioner Merman, and Commissioner Beckner, and staff will set up with you as to a time frame that you all can meet to start the process, and then when any other recommendations you all might have to bring forward to the board. Okay? Thank you. Mr. Barnes.
One other question, Mr. Chair, is that evaluation committee, is that also going to consist of the members of the ad hoc committee, or how do you want that?
When you say evaluation of the performance of the current contract?
No, sir. When the solicitation is released, we'll release an RFP. Part of the solicitation process is receiving the RFPs. Last time, in evaluating the RFPs, so I know the ad hoc committee traditionally has oversight of over all of that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would encourage you to let the ad hoc committee meet first before any RFPs, and then you can coordinate all that.
I totally agree with that, and I think that if I'm not mistaken, our ad hoc committee is the one that scored it and then presented it to the full board for a vote.
Last time, yes, sir.
Last time, yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I think that the ad hoc committee can make a decision as to whether or not that was a good process to follow. And having, since I'm chair, I probably won't sit on the ad hoc committee, and having three members is good. And then Commissioner Merman, of course, was on it before. Unfortunately, Mr. Govan, no offense to Mr. Vance here, is no longer on our board. No reflection of you, Eddie. So I think that they can go forward and make a determination and then bring forward to the full board what our selection is going to be.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Now we're back for a action item on 2A, which is to certify our ad valorem tax millage rate for the fiscal year of 2015.
So moved.
Do we have a second? Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I see none. Okay. Next is the chairs and interim chief executive officer report. Because we didn't have a PLG meeting this past month, I'll defer this month, and especially because I think we have some issues that have come up in terms of safety and some other things from what has happened recently. I'm going to defer and let the interim CEO make her report now.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. On the interim CEO report, this is a long report, and it's the punishment for going 6 weeks since our last board meeting. But next time will be really short. You only have 2 weeks. As the councilman noted, I'm certain we all saw on the news last week, not just vehicles driving into HART buses, but there was a lot of activity, which is, it's a good time to look at how we structure security issues system-wide and specifically at MTC. So not to volunteer Jeff and Michael, but ideally by August 4th, we will be back speaking with you about proposals to change how we are doing our security at MTC, and also an update on how we're using the surveillance on the vehicles to ensure safety and security. We would like to stress that though we did have a, I don't even know the politically correct way to talk about last week. We had a really violent encounter with a passenger who was just trying to get to work with 2 other folks with criminal records. We carry 15 million passenger trips a year. We do 8 million miles of service. Obviously, any assaults are too many assaults, and we would like to continue to be able to say it never happened. So for years in the future, we'll be able to say, except for that one time in 2014. But we do want to come back with a brief to you on how we are doing security and come up with some options to potentially help MTC feel more secure and be as much of a deterrent as it can be. Our staff deserves to feel safe and secure just as much as our patrons do, and we'd like to bring this back to you next month. It felt like next week, but it's 2 weeks from now. So Jeff and Michael, you've been voluntold gentlemen. Thank you very much, but you've been working on this already, so it's just a matter of getting our information together. You've also probably been reading about the West Shore Intermodal Center. It's of concern with the downtown, the Tampa Chamber of Commerce, the West Shore Development Area, FDOT. There was a public hearing last week to discuss the West Shore Intermodal Center, what's going on, where is it? The HART board, I am not aware, has received a formal presentation on West Shore Intermodal Center, and the groups behind it would like to get a discussion with the HART board and some level of support. So with your indulgence, we'll go ahead and schedule a presentation. Would the board be looking for anything more than a formal presentation to come through the committee process and then back to the full board to explain the intermodal center, its needs, its progress, and answer the board's questions before the board would be able to say yes or no on liking it?
Are we anticipating, Mr. Chairman, that there'll be someone from DOT? Did they not conduct most of the study? Are they not going to pay for it?
I believe DOT is the one that was talking about the study itself and for paying for it. And, you know, it's their land, their
Right, so
their
I
presentation.
would hope in addition to local support groups, we would have some kind of formal presentation from DOT. Their project, their money, right?
They should be here if they're going to make the presentation, so, yeah, okay.
So we'll work on getting that scheduled in the near future. Also, at our June 9th workshop, we had talked about ridership numbers and cost numbers for various iterations of the TDP. Staff sent this out, and this is a big, nice, colored and very technically involved spreadsheet. You sent it out via email. We also have a hard copy here. This is the information from the currently adopted 2013 TDP. So in yellow is your status quo plan, and that is what is contained within the budget. That is working on existing funding sources. The green is the vision plan, as Mr. Roche had noted. This is essentially doubling the amount of transit service in the county. So this is what is in the adopted plan. The board had asked for this information to be brought forth in a way that would be, here's what the expense is, and here's what the ridership information is. I know it is a lot to go through, but we did want to make sure this was shared again. We're happy to come and talk to folks, walk through it. If there's any questions today, happily answer them. Otherwise, just bring this to you to show this is the information which has been adopted. The other issue which was brought up at the June 9th meeting was the expansive beyond the bus, what would be a great idea for transit and transportation. And I believe, Lena, we have this to hand out too, the Dream and Little Dream information on ridership. The specific request from Commissioner Beckner was put together the buffet of transit options and bring it back for the board to consider. Again, it's, are we getting those for the handouts, Lena? We don't have them for handouts? We do have them. We don't. Okay. We will get these to you electronically and then paper copies. Okay. The specific question from Commissioner Beckner was, can we have a buffet showing what type of improvements, what type of projects to make? We'd put out a very wide buffet. We've narrowed it down. A narrowed down budget still looks like $200 million. That's an awful lot of money. The TDP vision plan was about $115 to $120 million.
$200 million for
annual operations. That's, yes, ma'am, it's a very big number. The vision plan would land you at about $115 million. So it is big, but here's what we need. We need to find out what is the easiest way to give this information to our board members, because these spreadsheets, I am a planner and these drive me crazy. So what is going to be the easiest way to share information that does not look like this, so the board can make, so you have the information you need to give us, your staff, direction on, okay, if we were to dream a little dream, we can safely say that we understand how much it costs to take all the express routes to a 15-minute window. And we can see, what is the best way to share this information? Is it individual presentations with you? What is the board's preference so we can help this become understandable? Because your staff would like to present for your consideration on August 4th, a snapshot that you can adopt, so when the county presentation comes out on August 12th, the HART board has approved what that transit component looks like. So what does this board need to see this information make sense, so in 2 weeks you would be comfortable taking some level of action?
And that's the 200 million operating?
Yes, ma'am. The print
Okay.
is small, but the numbers are big.
And remind me what 1 cent sales tax produces?
As I understand, 1 cent in current dollars is $200 million a year. There's, of course, an inflation factor. Well, this is a very
balances, doesn't it?
And that was not intentional, because this is a very expansive plan. And as Dr. Polzin had noted, this plan does include projects that in a rational universe you wouldn't get to for 45 years, but we wanted to put everything out there to consider.
It's a very high-calorie buffet that we're looking at.
It's like a cruise every day, Commissioner.
Well, this gets us well on the way towards the next step.
Yes, ma'am.
That's great.
So
That's great.
does the board then prefer that we will email this out today? and then wait, and if for response feedback, we again are happy to come meet with folks, or just information coming back on what you'd like us to present. Again, you are the board for transit. You need to be able to say that you approve what your staff takes forward to the county for inclusion in a big presentation on the 12th of August.
Hey, Catherine, and I'm sorry to jump in, what I think would be helpful is that if, I mean, it's great to have all the details here, but if you could have a summary slide or two that would basically give us the bottom line capital for each of the plans and bottom line operating revenue that would be required, that would be quite helpful.
Yes,
and then
sir.
we can individually delve into the details, and then maybe you can also, during our briefings, give us a 30,000-foot overview
Yes, sir.
of it as well. Thank you.
And if you went with every single thing that's on.
Anything else, Catherine?
Oh, I think that's enough, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith, if you can give us your general counsel's report, please.
Essentially, what I provided you in your agenda is a summary of some of the issues dealing with, I'd say, actual and potential constraints, parameters, and requirements under the statute and under the charter with respect to a potential expansion of what HART does or restructuring of its governance. What I did not do is I did not include in there some potential alternative solutions or ways to look at these. I wanted you to start with what are the parameters that we need to address in order to do whatever it is this board decides to do. I mean, it's somewhat logical because we don't know yet, I don't know yet what the board wants to do, and there's so many different permutations that could come from this process. Mine is not a policy role. Mine is to help you understand how to get there. So partly I didn't want to prejudge that process. So you've got some issues in here that I discussed, some of which I did in conjunction with Ms. Egan, some questions that she had regarding some potential structures. So you have those here, but I also would like to balance that with a comment that also under the ordinance, I'm talking about the statute, so long a city attorney, I speak in terms of ordinances. And Chapter 163, Part 3, which is the basis for this body, and then, of course, the charter that created it. There is also another section of Chapter 163 called Part 1, which allows for interlocal agreements. There are some limitations on what you can do with interlocal agreements, but they're an opportunity for this board, as currently constituted or as restructured, to enter into agreements with other governmental entities and agencies to accomplish things. Generally, the things that you can accomplish are things that both of the parties have authority to do. And there's a bunch, legal term, of additional research that would need to be done to address a variety of different issues in terms of where this board wants to go, how you're going to coordinate with the policy leadership group, and what comes from your communications with the citizens at large. So I have a lot more work to do once this body goes through its decision-making process and determines what exactly it intends to do. If you look at 125, for example, that's a statute that authorizes the county, among other things, which was news to me because I was never a county attorney, I was a city attorney. But if you look at some of the powers counties have, one of those powers is to provide and operate air, water, rail, and bus terminals, port facilities, and public transportation systems. That's a rather pregnant phrase. We don't know exactly what all is included in that. And the other thing I'd caution you about, what you have in my memorandum is essentially a textual analysis. I read the statute, I read the charter. There's not a lot of case law out there. And so, and when you start determining what text means, the reason we have lawsuits is because people differ in terms of what a text might mean, and ultimately the judiciary makes that decision. We don't have the benefit of those kinds of disputes resolved by a judiciary. For example, one minor point in the memorandum, it talks about weighted voting. And what I really did, if you'll notice, perhaps a little sleight of hand, I said the statute was a little unvague, but it seems to be clear in the charter. If you look at the statute, you can make an argument for either case. Don't know that we even need to go there. Don't know that that's something this board's going to recommend. So rather than spend an inordinate amount of time looking at a variety of options, I think I need to get out of the way, answer your questions in terms of what limitations there may be, and then let this board decide exactly what it intends to do, and then I can help advise the board on the problems that presents and the solutions that might be available.
Okay. Dr. Bozine?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Let me start. I'm not a lawyer. And also, as I indicated last time, that, you know, I don't feel governance is broken. Having said that, if changing in governance is conducive to getting this agency better, more resources to do better transit service, you know, I'm fine with that. I'm excited about that. My original perception was that the strategy that was being at least looked at by the policy leadership group was appealing because it didn't require legislative change, it didn't require new charter amendments, et cetera, that it was something that could be implemented without the drama of waiting for legislatures and et cetera, et cetera. As I'm interpreting your comments, that's not the case. Is that a fair interpretation of your comments or not?
Well, it depends in part in what is intended. I did not attend any of the policy leadership group meetings. I will be going to the one in August, and I plan on attending the balance of them. So I could not tell you exactly what their articulated vision is. As a matter of fact, I think there's a little bit of uncertainty there among that group as well. I think they took a trial vote to move forward and present this to HART, for HART to start the ruminations and to see what would happen. So I think there's going to be a lot of give and take there. So as it stands right now, let me also tell you one other thing. It was my opinion, clearly from reading the documents, that the terms were supposed to be 3-year terms. However, it has been both the city of Tampa's practice and I believe Hillsborough County's practice to renew those appointments annually. That's not what I believe the statute says, not what I believe the charter says. However, both the city attorney and the county attorney have an argument for why that's exactly right, and it may very well be predicated upon the inherent powers that exist in the city council pursuant to its charter and limitations and powers inherent in the county based upon how it's been constituted. Point is, there's a lot of questions I still have, so I don't want to be too definitive when I would like to hear what some of the other folks who've looked at these issues think about it, because it is kind of establishing new ground. But yeah, we've got some limits that are a problem.
I mean, my concern is that if this was perceived as an issue that could be resolved and at least in some scenarios implemented quickly without a lot of drama and be in place as a precondition of a referendum, that's one thing. If it's something that's conditional upon a referendum or statute change or you know, lawsuits, challenges, et cetera, then that changes the dynamics a little bit and potentially would, and I guess is what I'd suggest here is that in light of this interpretation, is the policy leadership group still inclined to try and move ahead with that governance strategy versus something else? And rather than us reacting to it, I'd like to understand if this redefines their perception or interpretation of what that governance change means, then in some ways I think the first step is for them to reaffirm that they feel strongly that we need to move ahead with that, and that the kinds of changes here, challenges, legislative changes, charter amendments, et cetera, that may or may not be implied are worth doing in the context of the overall strategy for referendum, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't, in some ways, I don't see that the burden's on us necessarily. I mean, we could certainly react, but the reality is the county commission holds all the cards. And so that in some ways there's no point in it. I think the challenge is really back to them to say, do you want to do this in light of the complexity of it, and does that help the referendum strategy or hurt it?
Well, I wouldn't know the answer to that, but I would know there are 2 specific limitations that would require a referendum. That is if you change how you want to spend the money, so you cannot change that. I'm talking about the tax. And the other one would be to withdraw, because there's a provision in the statute that says if you have passed a referendum and got the electors to approve it, you also have to decide to withdraw the same way. But outside of that, there's no hard and fast rule. I'm not sure how you would like to, I can certainly speak with my counterpart at the county, whom I speak with often, and he's here as a matter of fact. I spoke with him yesterday.
Shadowing you.
And we can talk about, he knows very well, I think, what the policy leadership group is thinking, and find out whether there is the sort of consensus or desire to move forward, and in what way. And then we could come back and say, here seem to be the areas or approaches that would be proffered or suggested by the policy leadership group, and now this board needs to decide what it thinks about those opportunities.
Okay. Commissioner Beckner.
Thank you, and appreciate that legal outline. But I just thought, since many of you don't sit, well, there's a few of you obviously do, and Mr. Chairman, you're also on that board. I thought I'd try to articulate what my vision was when this had come forward in our discussions. When we look at addressing transit, I view HART as the transit planning, or as the transit agency. We had a lot of discussions about, when we're talking about governance, what authority would be appropriate, and to me it's a no-brainer that HART is that authority. The second part of it is that transit we are expanding, and not even so much expanding, but transit is taking on more than just a role of just buses, and I think we're realizing that. My mind, transit also is about roads. It's about all modes of transportation that helps individuals get from point A to point B. We often talk about the silos of government and how we are working in our own independent silos. We just had a discussion about the MPO and having them help with a portion of the planning. They're doing planning. We were on a track of doing planning. FDOT is doing some sense of planning. What this current structure, I think, is missing, existing today, are the inputs of the other partners, and the partners sitting around this table in some capacity, whether as an appointed director or as an ex officio. We are missing all those different agencies and people sitting at this table. So I thought that a reconstruction of HART would make sense to include everybody at the table, so we can now plan transit with community subcommittees, as well as this whole entire agency with everybody at one table. As far as money goes, to me, it makes absolutely no sense to go out and try to recreate another taxing authority or structure to do what HART is already doing. It's just a matter of repurposing of what we're doing, relooking at the mission of what we're doing, and again, incorporating all of those other partners. Some of the other turns of the conversations then talked about the presence of more elected bodies on here. I think that's up for discussion. But for me, it was a no-brainer to choose HART as being the lead transit agency. We just needed to expand the mind share that sits around at this table, and so that we can start more cohesively planning transit for our community, as opposed to being stuck in our own individual silos. So that's part of my rationale.
Mr. Roche.
And I agree wholeheartedly. It is nice to have. I agree with the part where it is nice to have the conversation with the different boards. I'm wondering, could we accomplish the same thing with perhaps a joint board meeting like we do when we meet with Pinellas, where we take maybe and I don't know, I'm just brainstorming here, but the city, the county, HART, and maybe the other agencies that would be involved, and meet on a regular basis, annually, quarterly. Could we accomplish the same thing without having to go through a referendum or something so drastic?
Well, your point is well taken, and for me, it's not just about having a meeting once in a while, once in a month, or once a quarter. We are now becoming a combined community that is on a regular basis. We are planning all together. So we're no longer, in my mind, we're not having the MPO over here doing all their plans. Well, we've got a planning staff that's doing here. We've got FDOT that's over here doing their plans. We are sitting around the table and discussing the transit needs for our community. That is not my intent, nor is what I'm suggesting, is that we become this super conglomerate of an agency where we're doing everything of FDOT's responsibilities, all of MPO's responsibilities. Everybody continues to do what they have done, but we're doing it now together in one room. And so when we leave this room for our regular meetings, then people know, or should know, what page everybody else is on, and we can have those joint discussions together.
Any other questions of Mr. Smith? Doctor?
A quick comment. The composition of the board is the easy piece. I mean, you've got a vacant seat as of today. You can put a commissioner in it or whoever you want. I think the bigger challenge is understanding the implied money flows of the governance. And if, in fact, the resources that by statute, I believe, come in through a sales tax and go to the county, if they were then given to HART with the intention that then HART would subdivide between transit and roads and other things, that was at least one characterization of how this new entity would operate, where it would have, in fact, some resource programming responsibility for the non-transit resources. If you choose instead to send, you know, X% to city X, Y, and Z and public works and Y% to transit, and then you have a different composition of the board talking about the transit group with full knowledge of what's going on in the public works departments and city administrations, that's a little different. So I really, ultimately, you kind of need to pick, you know, the money flows. You got to map it against the money.
Yes, Mr. Roche.
Well, I'd like to respond to that because, kind of to the point you made earlier, I don't know if it's broken. If you look at the ferry, the county wanted the money for the ferry. They came to HART, they did the grant application through HART. HART's the pass-through organization, and that money now will flow to the county. And I'm sure there's more to it than that. But if it's, you know, the money is the issue, I don't think the governance is an obstacle to flowing the money where it needs to be.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Egan, but
Well, let her ask. Is there a question that can be answered, Ms. Egan, in terms of what you just asked?
I'm looking at Jeff, and as far as the cash flow,
right, and using the ferry as the example of how different money from the feds, because we are the designated recipient, can flow to the other agencies.
and I believe we probably are talking two slightly different things. So you're right, this is a great example of how HART, as a designated grantee, can get a project kicked off and can go through it. But as I understand separately, more to Dr. Polzine's point, the only entity which can levy a sales tax is a charter county, and there are certain responsibilities a county is going to have for that money, whether or not they receive all of it and pass it through part and parcel. There are different responsibilities that don't disappear just by having it come to HART, because it can never come directly to HART or whatever the super agency is. Sales tax money would have to come to the charter county and be distributed from there. That is the extent of my knowledge on the topic. I don't know if Jeff wants to add anything to that.
That's accurate. That's because we're not a levying authorized agency in the state of Florida for that charter. It's got to be a charter county. So the money would have to go to, just as we did with the CIT funding, would go to, if there was no talk of a super agency, it would still go to it would go to Hillsborough County, and through an interlocal arrangement, that funding requirement would come back to HART for expenditure. As far as the federal dollars to pass through, it's the ferry money did come to it's HART's money or funding. HART is ultimately responsible to the federal government for how that money is spent. So although we are still looking at how the county will fund the additional $8 million to match it, at the end of the day, HART is still responsible for the adjudication of that funding, period. It will come back to HART on how it's spent and when it's spent.
But I guess my point, though, is a little broader, that it does work with the CIT. Obviously, we got the funds from the county to do the Metro Rapid, and then in the reverse, as far as the federal dollars, I mean, it's not as if the governance has been an obstacle. We still have been able to do most of what we want in that regards.
through interlocals, through GPAs. An example would be the money that we're receiving for the fare boxes. We have 8 counties or 8 agencies that are going to receive state funding using HART as the direct recipient for that funding. Through a memorandum of understandings and interlocal agreements, we will have a process set up to move that money to those agencies upon their expenditure and reimbursement. So it is a model that has been done, and we are doing it now.
Sure. Okay, Mr. Sharp, and then Ms. Davin. Go ahead, sir.
Well, and I think that I heard Jeff say the magic words, the interlocal, the MOUs. Are there any prohibitions to HART entering into interlocals or MOUs in order to create, first for the attorney, and then for Jeff or anyone, a more robust HART?
As I indicated under Chapter 163, Part 1, you can enter into ILAs as long as it meets the requirements of the statute, and it sounds like you have a significant amount of commonality. So generally, yes, I guess, to give you a more direct answer.
When I began having conversations with Mr. Merrill about this years back, the concern was looking back at the 2010 referendum. There was a lot of conversation about the what, but the how kind of got pushed together at the end. And there was a lot of confusion about how the money was going to flow, and it would go to the county, then back to HART. The governance issue was like kind of left at the end, and there was a lot of fighting going on. Mr. Merrill was indicating, and that's one of the reasons why he wanted the policy leadership group taking this up first, was he thought that first we should discuss what this entity should do, but then get quickly to the governance question, so we wouldn't have the governance coming in at the tail end of any referendum question, and it just kind of gets pushed together and it doesn't work very effectively. And to Mr. Roche, I would say it's not broken, but sometimes things that aren't broken still aren't working to the best. And I look at any agency, any group, any business that runs on the, if it's not broken, we just let it ride, well, you're going to get what you get. And the idea is to have a much more robust organization with, quite frankly, transit at the lead. And I've dealt with these type of structures in the military where you do have large entities, unified commands, so to speak, that have a number of other sub-elements. If you have a unified command, that doesn't mean that the sub-elements are any way they lose their authority, but they do coordinate and work through the point person. So now, when outside agencies are working with us on large projects, large and small, they don't have to go to 10 different groups and agencies and get conflicting opinion. They've got one lead, they've got an attorney, and they have a board that can then deal with those projects, large and small. It's not perfect, but it works better than the standing system, which, and Mr. Fletcher pointed out to us, got multiple different jurisdictions, some overlapping, some not. And oftentimes we've got studies going on and you got 2 entities don't even know the studies are occurring. Now everyone would know, because we would again have Miss Egan, if she happens to be the head of this entity, she would be in charge. And she would be the point person. And she'd be coordinating with all the other elements. They would not lose their authority, but they would, so as Commissioner Beckner indicated, it's not a power grab, but it's far better coordination.
Ms. Davin.
Well, I appreciate everything that's been said, and I know it's sincere, and there's some merit to it. But if we want to just get down to the practicality of it, we're talking basically about money. How is it going to come into the county? How is it going to be spent, designated, and how is it going to be allocated? I am very reluctant to proceed with anything that suggests we're going to put road and bridge money in with transit money. That's just not going to work. I've served on the county commission, I've served on the city council, I've served on this board alternately several times. You cannot mix road and bridge money with transit money. You're talking about 2 different needs, you're talking about 2 different sets of planning, and you're talking about great difference in how you implement. So I am totally opposed to suggesting that we're going to have a super agency that's going to do roads and bridges and transit. And then that brings you right back to the money, okay? If you're not going to have an agency that's going to do both, then you need 2 separate agencies. I think when you go to sell a plan to the county voters, and that's where my mind is, not with who's here running a meeting. My mind is, how are we going to convince the people of this county to have the faith to go ahead and approve a really well-thought-out plan to have better transit now and in the future? And I don't think that we want to get distracted with issues of what's in chapter this and what's in chapter that, and how you might be able to form a governance board, or how you might not be able to, or are you going to have weighted voting, or are you going to have this or that. I think that just is going to, in the end, potentially take away from the support that we're looking for from the people of this county. I don't want to see us get down into an argument with the county administrator. I don't want to see us get down into an argument with any of the elected boards. I want to see us figure out how we are going to form a transit plan for the future and move forward with that, not get sidetracked into a whole lot of arguments that have great political potential for problems. I think we ought to, I think this board ought to decide if they feel HART in its current capacity, as it is legally drawn now, is the agency that can best lead for transit needs into the future. And if so, we ought to tell the county governance that's what we believe. I mean, it's not a very complicated question. It's a question of, do we think that this board and this agency, in the composition it's in now, is capable of taking us forward into the future and helping the county pass a referendum that's going to help Temple Terrace, that's going to help Plant City, and help the city of Tampa and the county. I think that's what we need to address.
Commissioner Merman, then Dr. Posey.
I'll make my points brief. I do think that part of the discussion the policy leadership group has developed because of leadership and a group taking transit, and I include roads. When I talk about transit, I do include roads, into the future and being held accountable for every dollar that's spent. You know, this is a follow the money game. That's the way government is right now. It used to not be that way, but it is follow the money. And I think that leaders will prioritize. They will be more accountable to, I think, the citizens, because they won't have to answer to all the citizens here in our county. I was looking at the budget and the approval of the millage, and there are a good portion of people in this county that are paying millage for our bus system that don't get anything. And, you know, I think that's a problem. And I think the county has recognized that. But in talking with the city, I think we've all just sat down and said, you know, and I'm not saying that I would never give less money to HART. I want HART to have more money. I'm frustrated by the budget because we still aren't doing what we need to do to increase revenue and become less dependent on the millage. I still, to this day, think that a broader leadership group would be able to go out and seek those revenue sources in a much broader way, a much bigger way. I look at it from, I think there's a lot to gain, nothing to lose. We just have so much work to do. We just have to get started. We have a huge deficiency in transit in this county, and I'm talking the whole county. And we've got to get started. We got to get started soon. And it's got to be people that can be held accountable. I just know any one person on the super group that would make a decision that wasn't, the citizens didn't like, they wouldn't be around any longer. That would include the mayors, county commissioners, whoever, and whoever else is added to the group, because I don't think anybody's really decided on what that makeup is going to be. But that's my thoughts.
Okay. Dr. Posey.
Just a couple comments. I mean, in some ways, this was kind of the hybrid approach to trying to create a super entity, and it's not a super entity. It's not like you would see in, the Twin Cities or Portland or other areas. And little things like the gas tax and the CIT taxes that go to transportation wouldn't be the purview of this agency. This agency wouldn't have any authority and standing with FDOT, unlike, for example, the MPO. MPOs are created as regional coordinating agencies. That's why all the modes and all the entities are represented there. Those are the folks that approve work programs and prioritization plans and have the authority, if they choose to use it, to influence the resource programming in the region. That authority exists, and it's a matter of leveraging and using that forum to coalesce regional needs and regional priorities and coordination, and including getting the membership on that to be the kinds of folks that that can do that. At least as it was characterized, this would be at best clumsy. I mean, technically you would be giving the money from the county to HART, who would then contract back to the public works departments to do, for example, maintenance activities, because HART's not going to do repaving. And it's clumsy the way, I mean, I apologize, but it's clumsy, and you'd still not clear how you'd coordinate it with CIT money or gas tax money or other fee revenues, et cetera. Again, don't let the issue of having the leadership and having the representation, you can do those things somewhat independent of structure and authority. And as I've said a dozen times, if the mayor wants to be on this board, the mayor can be on this board, today. And if you want different membership here, that's fine. But be careful about messing with mission and roles and money flows and all those other things. And don't forget that the clout you have with FDOT in terms of establishing regional priorities is through the MPO process.
Okay. Commissioner Beckner.
Thank you, and I'll respond especially to Director Davin. I really appreciate your comments and your insight on that, because you are well rooted in these conversations. You've been doing this quite a bit longer than I have. And let me just, for clarification, it's not at least my personal intent to think that we are going to put all money streams flowing into one big pot and divvy it up that way. I don't personally, from my vision and what I have seen so far, would envision that the money flow structure, as I would see it, would be very similar to what we have today, unless via referendum and through the interlocal agreements that the property tax is repealed for the funding of HART and is replaced with the sales tax, and then I think that's all divvied up via the referendum and through the interlocal agreements. So I'm not suggesting that this board would take over the decisions of the percentage that we would delve to roads or what we're going to put in as far as the mode. So I do see the whole system as transit, but I break it down into two segments. You've got modes and you've got roads. And so those are two very important parts of the transit system. My whole vision and my whole thought is that we just need to coordinate this in a much better fashion than what we have been doing, because I'm telling you, for the last since 2008, and I can remember going through that referendum, sitting on the MPO, sitting on the HART, and then being with the mayor, everybody was working on their own plans, and nobody was sitting here doing the coordination. And so moving forward, even beyond the referendum, we need to be sitting at the same table where we understand the impacts of where we're putting transit lines, where it needs to be served, versus also what are the road needs in that particular area, what are the other transit needs, et cetera, and then being able for all the planners to be able to be on one page in one room and say, okay, we all know and are in agreement, or at least are having our voices heard of what needs to be done versus transit, roads, et cetera, within the transportation network. So at least it's not my intent, again, that we're going to have a super budget where we're going to have all these monies flowing and then we're going to be fighting over what we're going to put towards roads or what we're going to be putting towards buses or any other transit systems. It's just being able to have everybody sitting here at the room, in one room, being able to make those decisions together. And again, everything else would be worked out through our interlocal agreements and however the referendum is defined.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? I don't see any. I would just make one statement, and then we'll hopefully end this 3-hour marathon. Some of the problems that I've had with the policy leadership group, irrespective of governance, is that the way the process has worked, I feel as if the staff is not, on the county side, has not presented some other alternatives that were successful systems across the country. I mean, Portland runs it from the MPO. I mean, should we have the MPO run the system? It's never presented or put forward. I think that we need to delve a little bit deeper into what we're talking about when we talk about governance. I do think that Mr. Smith's analysis is very helpful for us, because we have to remember that this is, without a doubt, our decision to make when it comes to transit. We are the authority that is governed by us to make those decisions. The county makes up a portion of this board. They do not control everything. They may control some of the dollars, and they may control the larger number of the members. If the county decides to remove members, that's their prerogative. I have nothing to say about that. Point is that it's still the board that makes decisions concerning transit and transit operations. And I think that we all have to realize that now before anything gets done. Because if there's going to be a referendum, many things have to change before HART can change in a direction that's completely different than where we are now. So I think that we all should at least keep that in mind. Even those members that are on the county commission, just remember that HART is not part of the county, and the county's not part of HART in that way. You gotta really separate the two so that when you make those votes, you make a decision that really puts into perspective what it is that we're actually trying to do. That's all I ask. I see nothing else in terms of questions towards Mr. Smith. We have nothing else before us besides, I don't think we have any old or new business. We do have some members of the public. Yes, ma'am.
There's a county meeting coming up on August 12th, and if I heard correctly, you all are going to be making some decisions at that meeting. Is that right, the policy group?
August 12th is the presentation of the transportation plan. I don't know if we will, it'll be up to the group if we decide what we're approving or not, but I know the governance thing, we're still, I mean, obviously, we're still working on that, but the transportation plan is going to be presented on August 12th.
Well, you sit on the policy group, and
Yes,
you
ma'am.
represent HART. When the policy group again takes up the governance question, I think the media and the other members of the policy group are gonna look at you and say, well, what is it? What is HART's position? So I think sooner or later, we are going to have an official HART position. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting there saying, well, I'm only one member of the board and I can't speak for them.
Well, that is a difficulty when you're sitting on a board that also has members of a board that's talking about this particular issue. So I'm put in a very unique position, to say the least. I do ask a lot of questions, and I don't know if anyone's been to the policy leadership group meetings, both publicly and privately with the staff, in terms of my concerns about what they're trying to do. Again, when I'm there, I ask the questions. I ask questions based on my experience being on this board, my experience in past life, in terms of things that I've looked at in terms of transit. But I do not feel comfortable saying this is HART's position. Because,
Exactly.
yeah, and I
Exactly.
think that and I think if we look back to the times that I've been there, I do not think I've made any of those type of statements, and I think that in your capacity
Nor
prior.
did I.
Yeah.
No.
So
Well,
I,
where I'm going with this, Mr. Chairman, is I think that we should instruct Ms. Egan to put on the August 4th board meeting the question of what position does the HART Board of Directors have on changing the governance prior to going to some kind of a countywide referendum.
I don't know if we can entertain that as a motion, because I don't know if we have a quorum to act. Do we, Mr. Smith?
You have 7. You have a 13-member board?
Are we still good?
We're good.
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure. So that's a motion on the floor. Have a second. You have a question, Mr. Sharp?
One of the concerns that the administrator, I think, had with the conversation about the legality, with regard to trying to determine what we could or could not do based upon the existing charters, that still had not been clearly articulated what this new entity would do. He was hopeful that what they would be able to do would be able to come up with a very clear, I think it was going to be presented in August, structure of what this new entity would be. There had been some conversation about, should it be the MPO, should it be the Planning Commission? We heard other suggestions, and I think the universal feeling of the policy leadership group was, there's going to be any entity that's going to be speaking for transportation and transit in particular, it should be HART. So that's why the focus went towards HART. Even conversation about maybe taking part of the PTC, at least maybe putting it under the umbrella of HART. So when HART talks about last mile, first mile, the conversation's together in one place. But I'm a little wary of us getting out ahead and saying, and I understand your concern, that if they, at the meeting on the 12th, adopt and say, well, this is what we're going to do, and HART hasn't had a chance to weigh in, that it might put this agency in a bind. But at the same time, they haven't had a clear opportunity to say what it is they think this entity should do. And then what they wanted to do is, once they determine what the mission and role of the entity is, then look at legally what we would have to do to step through this process to get there. Would we have to enter into MOUs? Likely. And then we would have the conversation with HART and others about how we would get there. I don't know if that helps.
If I could just verify, and I will ask our attorney to weigh in on
He's not
this.
gonna
The Policy
understand
Leadership
any
Group has no legislative power to do anything. They are a group that's meeting to talk about ideas. It is not a, regardless, I know that your administrator made a public statement that said that because we have the county commission, the head of the HART, and members of the other municipalities that we can act. It sounded like that movie Frost-Nixon, where Nixon says, because I'm the president, I can make those decisions, and he didn't end up in the right place. You know what I'm saying? So to me, you have to be very clear that what the Policy Leadership Group is doing is coming up with ideas on what they want to do to go forward. You can do anything you want in terms of holding back dollars, changing your board membership, and I think that we have to be very, very clear about that, because there's been a lot of press, ink spilled on this particular issue, and it is not the Policy Leadership Group. We don't have the power as the Policy Leadership Group to do anything. We're all separate entities. There is no power there. And I think that Mr. Smith would probably agree with that, is that, there are a bunch of folks that are talking about lots of different things. We meet on a quarterly basis with the school board and county commission and city council. We don't have any power to do anything, because each one of those members have a different vote. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about it, because I don't want to confuse the issue that whatever the Policy Leadership Group does, we have to follow, because we're still an independent board. Even if it's made up with 3 county commissioners, all 3 of the county commissioners can be outvoted here, or they could be in the majority. I don't know. I'm just saying that we can't let's not confuse the issue. That's the only thing I would suggest of all our members from both sides. Okay, let's go on to the public. If there's nothing else, I would appreciate. There was a second. Mr. Posey, Dr. Posey mentioned it. I apologize. Let's clear it. All in favor of that particular motion by Ms. Davin. Second it.
I'm sorry.
Yes, if you could restate.
Sure.
That's okay.
I said that because we have a meeting on the 4th of August, the county commission as policy group had a meeting on the 12th, that I think we ought to send our chair
Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much.
And if the county knows more about what they're proposing by the 4th, I would very much appreciate it.
Well, that's a good answer too.
I think you just pointed out the problem of trying to make
Sure.
super agents.
All right, we do have two members of the public that like to speak to us now, unless there's any old or new business that we have before us. Miss Michaela Stuckey, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And Ms. Stuckey, before you come to the board, I noticed that your item is ATU. Please come to the microphone. You know, if it is a issue concerning contractual things, we may not be able to do it, so please go ahead and go forward. I apologize.
Of course, it's not on.
Yeah.
I just want to bring some positive thoughts forward. We finally broke a major door down at HART, which we've been fighting for 3 years, thanks to Ms. Egan, thanks to Ms. Burkhardt. We finally think we reached a point where we can sit on the table and take care of issues, what needs to be dealt with in order to, which I call the spine of HART, is our bargaining employees, because we say if the spine is hurt, broken, then the whole body is broken, and we're looking forward to take care of those issues. And some of it I had to completely delete because the people who can answer, they are not here anymore. So next time we know to sign up front.
Okay.
That was it from my side.
Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Appreciate it. Next, we have Mr. James Saunders. Sir?
Good afternoon. Now, I'm James Saunders, president of ATU. And Ms. Egan earlier alluded to some safety issues on our units. During all the discussion today and everything about funding, growth, security needs to be a major issue with that also. As we go out, as our system grows throughout the county, we have to find ways to protect the public and the employees just as well, as far as, you know, safety, have ridership feel secure using our system, and employees feel safe coming to work. So as you go along, looking at ways to improve the system, safety needs to be right up there with it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Saunders. Okay, is there anyone else, a member of the public, that would like to speak at this time? I see no one. If that's the case, if there's no other business before us, we are adjourned. Thank you.